If there's one thing Sword Art Online fans have built a reputation for, it's defending this franchise no matter what. It doesn't matter how weak the writing is, how many plot holes pile up, how many characters get wasted, or how many baffling creative decisions are made. Somehow, there's always a group of fans ready to tell you that you just didn't understand it, or that it all makes sense if you read the light novels. To some of these people, Sword Art Online isn't just an anime, it's practically beyond criticism. But even blind loyalty has its breaking point. And that's exactly what makes Unanswered Butterfly so fascinating. This is one of the rare occasions where even parts of the Sword Art Online fanbase couldn't keep pretending everything was perfect. The usual excuses started running out. Instead of endless praise and damage control, you started seeing disappointment, frustration, and outright criticism coming from the very people who normally bend over backwards to defend this franchise. These aren't random haters looking for another excuse to dunk on Sword Art Online. These are actual fans, the people who should have been the easiest audience to satisfy. Think about that for a second. These are the same fans who have spent years defending every controversial arc, every questionable writing decision, and every garbage release. If anyone was going to give this movie the benefit of the doubt, it was them. And yet, even they couldn't ignore it. When your own fanbase starts turning on you, that's more than just a bad review. That's a warning sign that something has gone seriously wrong. These were the people who wanted this movie to succeed. They were already emotionally invested in the franchise. They were already predisposed to like it. If you can't even satisfy your core audience, then who exactly did you make this movie for? When Mother's Basement uploaded his video criticizing the new Sword Art Online movie, I expected the usual response. I figured the comment section would be flooded with fans insisting he didn't understand it, accusing him of hating the franchise, or telling everyone to ignore him because he's been milking Sword Art Online for years. Instead, I found something I genuinely wasn't expecting. Mixed in with all the predictable defenses were several comments from actual Sword Art Online fans admitting that the movie was terrible. That caught me completely off guard. These weren't people who hated Sword Art Online from the beginning. These weren't random critics looking for another excuse to bash the franchise. These were fans, people who already liked Sword Art Online, who wanted this movie to be good, and who were probably more willing than anyone else to overlook its flaws, and yet, even they couldn't defend it. Think about how significant that is. Normally, the biggest supporters of a franchise are the easiest people to please. They've already bought into the world, the characters, and the story. They're the audience most likely to give a new release the benefit of the doubt. If anyone was going to walk away saying that wasn't so bad, it should have been them. Instead, some of them were saying the exact opposite. That tells me this wasn't just another case of critics being overly harsh. When people who already love your franchise start calling the latest installment disappointing, you've got a much bigger problem than a few negative reviews. It also completely destroys the narrative that all criticism comes from haters. Clearly, it doesn't. Some of it is coming from the franchise's own fan base. People who wanted to enjoy the movie ended up criticizing it anyway because they simply couldn't ignore how bad it was. Honestly, I found those comments far more interesting than the usual blind defenses. They showed that not every Sword Art Online fan is willing to pretend everything the franchise releases is automatically a masterpiece. Some of them are actually capable of looking at the movie honestly. And when even your own fans are saying the movie is trash, that's not just criticism. That's an indictment. So what happened? How did Sword Art Online manage to disappoint the very people who have spent years defending it? What was so bad that even some of the franchise's most loyal supporters couldn't bring themselves to praise it? And perhaps more importantly, what does the reaction to Unanswered Butterfly reveal about the current state of Sword Art Online as a whole? Let's take a look.
This comment is probably one of the most interesting reactions because it comes from someone who describes themselves as a diehard Sword Art Online fan and still walked away feeling completely disappointed. This is not someone who went into the movie looking for reasons to hate it. This is someone who is already invested in the franchise, someone who has supported Sword Art Online enough to call themselves a diehard fan. And yet even they reached the point where they had to say, no, this is not acceptable. And that is a pretty big failure. The fans who are most attached to a franchise are usually the ones who are the most forgiving. They are the people who will overlook weak writing, give characters extra chances, and defend questionable decisions because they already have an emotional connection to the series. So when even those fans are saying a new release is a huge disappointment, that says a lot. The usual defense whenever Sword Art Online gets criticized is that critics simply do not understand the franchise or that the series was never made for them. But this comment completely challenges that argument. This person is the audience. This person is the type of viewer the movie was supposed to satisfy. and yet they rejected it. That means the problem is not just coming from outside critics who don't get Sword Art Online. The disappointment is coming from within the fanbase itself. When the people who are most willing to support your franchise are the ones saying, "This was a mistake," that is a serious warning sign. It shows that even nostalgia, loyalty, and years of attachment were not enough to cover up the movie's problems. A franchise can survive criticism from outsiders. What is much harder to ignore is criticism from the people who wanted to love it. And when a die-hard fan is saying they cannot accept it, maybe the problem is not that everyone else is being too harsh. Maybe the movie simply failed to meet the standards of the very fans it was made for. And honestly, if a die-hard Sword Art Online fan is walking away from this movie feeling disappointed and rejecting it, that is probably the biggest warning sign possible. These are not the people who were looking for an excuse to hate the franchise. These are not casual viewers who never cared about Sword Art Online in the first place. These are the people who have defended it for years, supported it through all of its controversial moments, and were already emotionally invested before they even walked into the theater. They are the exact audience this movie was supposed to satisfy. So if even they are saying, "No, this doesn't work," then that says a lot more than a random critic complaining about it. A critic can always be dismissed as someone who was never going to like it anyway, but when the biggest supporters start losing faith, that is much harder to ignore. At that point, the usual excuses start falling apart. You cannot simply say, "They just don't understand Sword Art Online," because this person clearly does. You cannot say, "It wasn't made for them," because they are literally the type of fan the movie was created for. And you cannot blame negativity from outsiders when the disappointment is coming from within the fanbase itself. If a die-hard fan, someone already willing to overlook flaws and give the franchise the benefit of the doubt, cannot defend it, then what chance does anyone else have? The people who were most prepared to love this movie couldn't even bring themselves to accept it. And that might be the harshest criticism of all. And that makes this reaction even more brutal. This person is not someone who suddenly decided they hated Sword Art Online after one bad experience. They are already a fan of the franchise. They have accepted the writing style, the questionable decisions, the weaker arcs, and all of the other problems that critics have been pointing out for years. They were already invested in this world and willing to overlook flaws that would probably make other viewers quit. In other words, this was someone who was already used to Sword Art Online's garbage standards. They knew what kind of series they were watching. They knew the franchise had its problems, but they still enjoyed it anyway. They were willing to defend it and stick around despite all the criticism it received. And yet, even they reached their breaking point. That is what makes this kind of reaction so damaging. When someone who has already accepted the franchise at its lowest points says, "No, this is too much," it shows that the movie failed to meet even the expectations of its own loyal audience. The usual defense of critics just hate Sword Art Online does not work here because this is not coming from someone who was never interested in the series. This is coming from someone who wanted to enjoy it. Someone who was already on the franchise's side. If a die-hard fan who has enjoyed the rest of Sword Art Online's questionable content cannot bring themselves to defend this movie, then that says a lot about how badly it missed the mark. The people who were willing to tolerate the franchise's previous problems finally looked at this release and said, "Even by Sword Art Online standards, this is not good enough." And that might be the harshest criticism the movie can receive. And that is what makes the reaction to Unanswered Butterfly even more embarrassing for the franchise. This movie was not supposed to win over critics or people who already disliked Sword Art Online. It was supposed to be a celebration for the most dedicated fans. It was made for the people who have followed the series for years, who know the characters, who understand the world, and who were already invested in the franchise before this movie even existed. The die-hard fans were supposed to be the easiest audience to satisfy. They were the people who should have walked away excited. They were the people who should have been defending every decision, praising every character, and telling everyone else why the movie was actually great. Instead, some of the very fans this movie was created for are the ones rejecting it. That is a massive problem. Because if the target audience itself is saying, "This isn't what we wanted," then who exactly was this movie made for? You cannot keep using the excuse that critics and outsiders simply do not understand sword art online when the people who understand it the most are also expressing disappointment. These are not people who were looking for a reason to hate the franchise. These are people who wanted another great sword art online experience. They already had the emotional connection, the nostalgia, and the loyalty that should have carried the movie. But even all of that was not enough. When a franchise reaches the point where its most devoted supporters are saying they do not want what is being offered, that is a sign that something went seriously wrong. The fans who were supposed to be the biggest defenders became some of the loudest critics. And that might be the biggest failure of all. A movie made specifically for the fans ended up being rejected by the fans themselves. It almost feels like some fans finally started seeing the reality that critics have been pointing out for years. Unanswered Butterfly became the straw that broke the camel's back. For a long time, many sword art online fans were willing to overlook the franchise's problems. They defended weak writing, questionable character decisions, and disappointing moments because they were attached to the world and the characters. They had already accepted the flaws because they loved the franchise enough to look past them. But eventually, there comes a point where even loyalty has limits. This movie seems to have reached that point for some fans. The people who were normally the first ones to defend sword art online started admitting that something was wrong. Instead of automatically praising it, they started questioning the writing, criticizing the characters, and openly expressing disappointment. And that is what makes this reaction different. When critics point out problems, fans can always dismiss it as another person who just hates sword art online. But when longtime supporters start saying the same things, that excuse becomes much harder to use. These are the people who wanted to enjoy this movie. They were already invested. They already had years of attachment to the franchise. They were not coming into it with a negative mindset. Yet even they reached their limit. At some point, nostalgia and loyalty can only carry a franchise so far. Fans can overlook flaws, but they cannot be expected to pretend that every release is amazing forever. Eventually, even the most dedicated supporters will look at something and admit that it simply does not live up to expectations. And for some sword art online fans, Unanswered Butterfly appears to be that moment. The movie that finally made them stop making excuses. The movie that made them say, maybe the critics had a point. For years, sword art online fans have always found a way to explain away every criticism the franchise receives. No matter what problem gets brought up, there is always another excuse ready. Bad writing? You just don't understand the story. Weak characters? Read the light novels. Poor MMO elements? It's not supposed to be a realistic MMO. Bad arcs? The next one gets better. There has always been an explanation for why everyone else was wrong and why sword art online was secretly brilliant. But with Unanswered Butterfly, those excuses seem to be running out. Because this time, the criticism is not only coming from outside the fanbase. It is coming from the very people who are supposed to defend the franchise. Fans who already love sword art online, who understand the series, and who wanted to enjoy this movie are admitting that something went wrong. And that creates a much bigger problem. It is easy to dismiss critics as haters when they are people who never liked the franchise in the first place. But when longtime fans start making the same complaints, suddenly the usual arguments do not work anymore. You cannot just say they do not understand sword art online when they are literally the audience that has supported it for years. The biggest defenders are now acknowledging the same issues that critics have been pointing out all along. And that has to be a painful realization for a fanbase that has spent years trying to prove everyone else wrong. Because eventually, there comes a point where there are too many problems to ignore. Eventually, even the most loyal fans have to stop making excuses and admit when something does not work. Maybe the critics were not just haters. Maybe they actually had a point. And for some sword art online fans, Unanswered Butterfly was the moment where defending the indefensible finally became impossible. And that is the important distinction here. This movie was not just considered bad by some fans. It was considered a huge disappointment. And that is almost worse. A bad movie can sometimes be laughed at, forgotten, or dismissed as another failed attempt. But a disappointing movie creates a different kind of reaction because it means people actually expected something better. It means there was hope. There was excitement. There was a reason to believe the franchise could deliver something worthwhile. The fans who disliked this movie were not going into it expecting to hate it. They were going in hoping to enjoy another Sword Art Online experience. They wanted to see their favorite characters, revisit the world they cared about, and get something that felt worthy of the franchise they had supported for years. Instead, they walked away feeling let down. And that is a much bigger failure than simply making a bad movie. At least with a bad movie, the audience can say, well, nobody expected much anyway. But with Unanswered Butterfly, the disappointment comes from the fact that even fans who were already invested in Sword Art Online felt like the movie failed to deliver. The bar was not even that high. This was a movie made for an existing fanbase that was already willing to forgive a lot. It did not need to convince people who hated Sword Art Online. It just needed to satisfy the people who were already there. But when those fans are saying, "This wasn't what I wanted," that is far more damaging than a critic simply saying, "I didn't like it." Critic can be ignored. A disappointed fan is much harder to dismiss. Because disappointment means the franchise had something to lose. It means people cared enough to have expectations, and the movie failed to meet them. So in a way, being simply bad would almost be an improvement. A bad movie can be written off. A disappointing movie is a reminder that even the people who wanted to love it ended up feeling betrayed. If the die-hard Sword Art Online fans cannot even stand this movie, then you already know there is a serious problem. These are the people who have defended this franchise through everything. They are the ones who stuck around through the controversial arcs, ignored the criticism, and continued supporting Sword Art Online despite all of the complaints that have followed it for years. They are not the people who were waiting for an excuse to hate the movie. They are the people who were most likely to enjoy it. They already had the nostalgia. They already cared about the characters. They already had a connection to the world. They were walking into this movie with every possible advantage. The movie did not have to convince them to like Sword Art Online because they were already fans. And yet, even they were disappointed. That is what makes their criticism so damaging. When a franchise's biggest supporters start admitting that something does not work, you cannot simply dismiss it as another hater opinion. These are the people who wanted the movie to succeed. They were the ones who should have been defending it the loudest. But instead, some of them are the ones saying, "No, this isn't good enough." At that point, the usual excuses start falling apart. You cannot blame people for not understanding the franchise. You cannot say they were never the target audience. They were the target audience. If the people who love Sword Art Online the most are struggling to defend it, then maybe the problem is not that everyone else is being too harsh. Maybe the movie simply failed. Because when even the most loyal fans cannot overlook the flaws anymore, that is usually a sign that a franchise has reached a breaking point. The people who were willing to accept almost anything finally found something they couldn't excuse. This movie is such a massive failure that it has reached the point where some Sword Art Online fans are not even proud to defend it anymore. That is a pretty embarrassing place for a franchise to be. For years, Sword Art Online fans have been some of the most loyal supporters in anime. They have defended the series through countless controversies, argued against critics, and insisted that people who dislike it simply do not understand what makes it great. But now, with Unanswered Butterfly, some fans are not even trying to defend it. Instead of proudly saying, "This is why I love Sword Art Online," they are admitting that the movie was disappointing, rejecting it, or even distancing themselves from it. The same people who spent years defending the franchise are now struggling to explain why this release exists. And that says a lot. A bad movie can still have passionate fans who stand behind it. A flawed movie can still have people saying, "I know it has problems, but I love it anyway." But when fans start feeling embarrassed by a new release, that is a different level of failure. It means the movie did not just disappoint outsiders. It damaged the confidence of the people who were already invested. The most loyal fans should be the ones proudly defending a new entry. They should be excited to talk about it, recommend it, and share their enthusiasm. Instead, some are left trying to explain why they still like a franchise that keeps giving them reasons to apologize for it. And that is probably the harshest criticism a franchise can receive. When your own fans are embarrassed to admit they enjoyed something, the problem is no longer just that critics dislike it. The problem is that the people who were always on your side are starting to question whether there is anything worth defending. The worst thing a movie can be is not necessarily bad. The worst thing a movie can be is disappointing. Because disappointment means there were expectations. It means people actually cared enough to want something better. A movie that is simply bad can be laughed at, ignored, or dismissed as something that was never going to work in the first place. But a disappointing movie is different. A disappointing movie means the audience walked in with excitement, hope, and a reason to believe it would deliver. They were not just watching something random. They were invested. They wanted to enjoy it. They wanted the franchise they cared about to succeed. And when the movie fails to meet those expectations, that failure hits much harder. That is why the reaction from some Sword Art Online fans is more damaging than criticism from people who already dislike the series. These fans were not looking for reasons to hate Unanswered Butterfly. They were hoping it would be another great experience from a franchise they have supported for years. Instead, they walked away feeling let down. That feeling of disappointment can be worse than simple dislike because it feels like wasted potential. It is the feeling of looking at something you were excited for and realizing it did not live up to what you imagined it could be. For critics, a bad movie might just confirm what they already expected. For fans, a disappointing movie feels like a betrayal. They gave the franchise their time, attention, money, and loyalty, expecting something in return. They wanted a story that respected their investment. They wanted characters and moments that felt meaningful. Instead, some fans were left asking why they were even excited in the first place. And that is why disappointment is such a serious failure. A franchise can survive people who never liked it. What is much harder to recover from is losing the excitement of the people who did. Because when your own fans stop saying, "I can't wait for the next one," and start saying, "I expected better," that is when you know something went wrong. This comment is another example of why the reaction to Unanswered Butterfly is so interesting. This is not someone who came into the movie wanting to hate Sword Art Online. This is a self-described big fan who was excited enough to pay money to see it, only to walk away feeling like the movie was an insult to the franchise. And honestly, that is a much harsher criticism than simply saying, "I didn't like it." This person is basically saying the movie failed at the most fundamental level. They felt like it was rushed, uninspired, and lacked the passion that made previous entries work. The fact that they specifically point out Kawahara's absence shows that even fans noticed something felt different. To them, this did not feel like a meaningful addition to the Sword Art Online story. It felt like a product using the franchise name without the same level of care behind it. And the most brutal part of the comment is that they believe the movie took the worst elements of early Sword Art Online and combined them with the worst possible characters. That is a devastating criticism, because even if someone enjoys Sword Art Online, they can still recognize that the franchise has always had controversial elements. The original Aincrad arc had an incredible premise, but it also had rushed storytelling, underdeveloped ideas, and plenty of missed potential. According to this fan, instead of fixing those problems, this movie brought them back and somehow made them even worse. The fact that they also say the movie made Aincrad feel boring is especially damaging. Aincrad is supposed to be the foundation of Sword Art Online. It is the setting that made the franchise famous and the part that many fans are most nostalgic for. So if a movie centered around Aincrad cannot even make Aincrad feel exciting, that is a huge failure. And then there is the issue of charging fans extra money for it. That makes the disappointment even worse. Fans are willing to spend money because they love the franchise. They are willing to support new releases because they want to experience more stories from a world they care about. But in return, they expect something that feels like it deserves that support. When fans start joking that the movie was not worth the extra cost, it shows the problem goes beyond normal criticism. They feel like the franchise took their loyalty for granted. What makes this comment even more interesting is that this same fan praises Progressive and considers it one of the best parts of Sword Art Online. This is not someone who hates the franchise or wants it to fail. They have seen Sword Art Online deliver something they genuinely enjoyed. That makes their disappointment with this movie even more meaningful. They know what a better version of Sword Art Online looks like. They have seen the franchise succeed. And that is exactly why this movie frustrated them so much. It was not just another bad release to them. It was a reminder of what Sword Art Online could have been and how far this movie fell short. The biggest problem with this comment is that this movie was supposed to be made exactly for people like this. This was not a project designed to bring in a completely new audience. It was not supposed to convince people who already disliked Sword Art Online. It was supposed to reward the fans who were already invested in the franchise, the people who still cared about Aincrad, the characters, and the world. This person was the ideal audience. They are a big Sword Art Online fan. They have followed the series, supported previous releases, and even enjoyed Progressive. They clearly still have a connection to the franchise and a desire to see it succeed. Yet, instead of walking away feeling excited or satisfied, they walked away feeling insulted. And that says a lot. When a movie made specifically for the fans ends up making those same fans feel disrespected, that is a major failure. The people who should have been the easiest to please are the ones saying the movie felt lazy, rushed, and like it did not understand what made Sword Art Online appealing in the first place. That is a much bigger problem than simply having critics dislike it. Critics can always be dismissed as people who were never interested in the franchise anyway. But when the core audience starts saying the same things, it becomes much harder to ignore. These are the people who wanted to enjoy this movie. They already had the nostalgia, the attachment, and the willingness to overlook flaws. The movie already had their support before they even watched it. All it had to do was give them a reason to keep loving it. Instead, some fans are saying it felt like a cash grab that did not respect their investment. And that might be the harshest criticism a franchise can receive. A movie can survive outside criticism because there will always be people who dislike any popular series. But when the fans themselves feel like they were let down, that means the problem is much deeper. The people who were supposed to feel rewarded ended up feeling disappointed. The people who were supposed to defend it ended up criticizing it. And when your own target audience feels insulted by the product made for them, that tells you everything you need to know. This movie was supposed to be a gift for the fans. It was supposed to be something they could watch, enjoy, and celebrate as a reward for sticking with Sword Art Online for all these years. It should have been a celebration of everything fans loved about the franchise. It should have been a chance to revisit the world, see familiar elements done well, and give longtime supporters something that reminded them why they became fans in the first place. Instead, for some fans, it had the complete opposite effect. Rather than feeling like a special event, it felt like a disappointment. Instead of walking away excited, some fans walked away frustrated and feeling like the franchise they supported had let them down. And that is what makes the reaction to this movie so damaging. This was not a random side project that nobody cared about. This was a movie aimed directly at the existing fanbase. The people behind it knew exactly who the audience was. They knew these were the people who had followed Sword Art Online for years, bought merchandise, watched previous releases, and continued supporting the franchise despite all the criticism it received. These fans were already on board. They did not need to be convinced. The movie just needed to give them something worth celebrating. But instead of bringing fans together, it created disappointment and frustration among the very people who were supposed to be the most excited. The people who should have been praising it were the ones questioning its quality and wondering why this was the direction the franchise chose to take. That is a major failure. A fan-focused movie should make fans feel appreciated. It should make them feel like their loyalty was rewarded. It should remind them why they invested so much time into the series. Instead, some fans are walking away feeling like their loyalty was taken for granted. And that might be the biggest problem with Unanswered Butterfly. It was supposed to be a love letter to the fans, but some of those same fans feel like they were handed something that did not respect their passion for the franchise. A movie made for the fans ended up disappointing the fans. And when the people who were supposed to celebrate your movie are the ones feeling the most let down, that says a lot. The quality of this movie is so bad that even some Sword Art Online fans felt like the entire thing was phoned in. And that is a pretty brutal criticism coming from the fanbase itself. Sword Art Online fans are usually the people most willing to give the franchise the benefit of the doubt. They are the ones who will defend questionable writing choices, overlook flaws, and find reasons to enjoy even the weaker parts of the series. They already have an attachment to the characters and the world, which means they are naturally more forgiving than the average viewer. So when even those fans start saying the movie feels lazy, rushed, or like it was made with minimal effort, that is a huge problem. The issue is not just that the movie had flaws. Every franchise has weak entries. The bigger problem is that some fans felt like there was no real passion behind it. Instead of feeling like a carefully crafted celebration of Sword Art Online, it felt like a product created simply because the franchise name would sell tickets. And that is the worst feeling for fans. People can forgive a movie for not being perfect. They can forgive small mistakes, awkward moments, or even questionable decisions if they feel like the creators genuinely cared about what they were making. But when something feels phoned in, it creates a completely different reaction. It makes fans feel like the franchise they supported for years did not put the same effort into giving them something meaningful in return. That is why this criticism hurts more coming from fans. They were not expecting perfection. They were not demanding some impossible masterpiece. They simply wanted something that felt like Sword Art Online actually cared about being Sword Art Online. Instead, some fans walked away feeling like they received a rushed, uninspired product that relied on the brand name rather than delivering something worthy of it. And when even the people most loyal to a franchise start saying, "This feels like they didn't even try," that is one of the biggest red flags a movie can have. To some fans, this movie represents everything they believe is wrong with Sword Art Online. It is not just another disappointing entry. It feels like every criticism people have made about the franchise turned up to the maximum. Instead of fixing the problems that critics and even some fans have pointed out for years, the movie seems to highlight them. The rushed storytelling, the questionable character writing, the lack of meaningful development, and the over-reliance on familiar Sword Art Online tropes are all pushed to the forefront. That is what makes the reaction from fans so interesting. Some viewers are not saying the movie failed because they suddenly hate Sword Art Online. They are saying it failed because it represents the worst version of the series they already know. For longtime fans, that can be even more frustrating. They have seen the franchise at its best. They know what Sword Art Online is capable of when it focuses on the things that made people invested in the first place. They have seen stories and characters that worked. So when a new release takes the weakest elements of the franchise and builds an entire movie around them, it feels like a step backward. Instead of feeling like a celebration of Sword Art Online, it feels like a collection of the exact things that made people criticize the series in the first place. The over-the-top characters, the awkward writing, the wasted potential, the feeling that the premise is more interesting than the execution. And when even fans start saying, "This is everything wrong with Sword Art Online," that is a much harsher criticism than anything an outsider could say, because these are people who wanted to enjoy it. They wanted another reason to love the franchise. They wanted something that reminded them why they became fans. Instead, some of them feel like this movie took every weakness Sword Art Online has ever had and turned the volume all the way up. It did not just fail to impress critics. It reminded fans why the franchise has been criticized for years. And perhaps the most embarrassing criticism is that some fans felt the movie actually made Aincrad boring. Think about how difficult that is to do. Aincrad is built on one of the most interesting premises in anime. Thousands of players are trapped inside a virtual reality death game where dying in the game means dying in real life. Every battle matters. Every decision has consequences. The entire concept is built around survival, strategy, exploration, and the tension of knowing that one mistake could be the end. That premise should be impossible to make boring. It is literally a world where every player is fighting for their life inside a massive fantasy MMO. There are countless opportunities for interesting stories, unique characters, intense conflicts, and meaningful exploration. And yet, somehow, this movie managed to make some fans feel like Aincrad itself was dull. That is a massive failure because Aincrad is supposed to be the part of Sword Art Online that people are most nostalgic for. It is the arc that introduced the world, created the original hook, and convinced millions of people to follow the franchise. If you cannot make Aincrad exciting, then what exactly are you doing? The setting is already doing most of the work for you. You have a giant floating castle, hundreds of floors to explore, players with different goals and personalities, and the constant threat of death hanging over everyone. The ingredients are already there. So when fans say the movie made Unanswered boring, they are not criticizing the concept. They are criticizing the execution. They are saying that even with one of the most interesting setups Sword Art Online has ever had, the movie still failed to create something engaging. And that might be the biggest missed opportunity of all. Unanswered is the part of Sword Art Online that fans have been asking to see more of for years. It is the world that started everything. It is the setting that should have been the easiest win possible. But instead of making fans excited to return to Unanswered, some fans walked away feeling like they never wanted to go back. When a movie takes a massive virtual reality death game and somehow makes it feel lifeless, that is not just a small problem. That is a complete failure to take advantage of the one thing that made Sword Art Online interesting in the first place. The premise of Sword Art Online alone should have been enough to create an action-packed and exciting movie. That is what makes this failure so impressive in the worst possible way. You have a massive virtual reality world where thousands of players are trapped inside a deadly game. If they die in the game, they die in real life. They are trapped inside a giant floating castle with hundreds of floors, monsters to fight, bosses to defeat, mysteries to uncover, and the constant pressure of knowing that every decision could be their last. That premise practically writes itself. It has everything an action movie needs. High stakes, intense battles, survival, strategy, exploration, and characters fighting against impossible odds. There are countless ways to make that setting exciting. And yet somehow, this movie managed to take one of the most naturally exciting concepts in anime and make some fans feel bored. That is not just a minor disappointment. That is a spectacular failure of execution. When a story has a premise this strong, the audience should not have to work hard to find the excitement. The world itself should create tension. The danger should feel real. The action should feel meaningful. The characters should feel like they are fighting for something important. Instead, some fans felt like the movie failed to capture the very thing that made Unanswered interesting in the first place. And that is what makes the criticism so brutal. The problem was not that Sword Art Online had a weak idea. The idea was always the strongest part. The problem was that even with one of the easiest setups imaginable for an action-packed adventure, the movie still could not deliver. It is almost impressive how difficult that is to mess up. You have a death game, a fantasy world, a trapped player base, and a massive virtual environment filled with possibilities. Any one of those elements could carry an entire movie. But instead of feeling like an epic return to Unanswered, some fans felt like they were watching a franchise that had forgotten why people were interested in it to begin with. When your entire premise is built around a deadly MMO where every battle could be the last, and you still cannot make it exciting, that is not a problem with the concept. That is a problem with the people handling it. And perhaps one of the most telling parts of this comment is that even this fan does not believe the movie was worth the extra $20. That is a pretty serious criticism because this is not someone who was trying to tear down the franchise. This is a fan who already enjoys Sword Art Online, someone who has supported the series, and someone who actually wanted to see this movie succeed. They were willing to spend their money because they believed the movie would be worth experiencing. But after watching it, they were left questioning why it cost even more. And that is where the disappointment becomes even more understandable. Fans are usually the easiest audience to sell to because they already have a connection to the franchise. They are not just buying a random ticket. They are paying because they want to support something they love. They want to believe their money is going towards something special. A fan-focused movie should feel like an event. It should feel like something worth paying extra for. It should make people walk out of the theater thinking, "I'm glad I spent the money to see this." Instead, some fans are walking away feeling like they paid a premium price for something that did not deliver. That is a major problem. When even the people most loyal to a franchise start saying, "This was not worth the extra cost," it shows that the issue is not just about personal preference. It is about whether the product actually justified the support it received. And the frustrating part is that Sword Art Online fans have shown time and time again that they are willing to support the franchise. They have watched the anime, bought merchandise, followed new releases, and continued investing in the series despite years of criticism. The audience was already there. The money was already there. The interest was already there. The movie just needed to give fans something that felt worthwhile. Instead, some fans feel like they were asked to pay more for a movie that did not match the quality or effort they expected. And that is probably one of the harshest criticisms a fan can make. A critic saying a movie is bad is expected. But a fan saying, "I love this franchise, and I still don't think this was worth my money," is much harder to dismiss. And that raises the obvious question. If even the fans themselves do not feel like this movie is worth the extra money, why should anyone else? The people who should have been the most willing to pay are the fans. They are the ones with the strongest connection to Sword Art Online. They are the ones who already care about the characters, the world, and the franchise as a whole. A casual viewer has no emotional attachment. They need a reason to spend their money. They need to believe they are getting something worthwhile. So if the most dedicated supporters of the franchise are already saying, "This is not worth the extra cost," that sends a pretty damaging message to everyone else, because this was supposed to be an easy sale. Sword Art Online did not have to convince its existing audience to care. The audience was already there. Fans were already interested before the movie even released. They were already willing to support it because they wanted to see more of a franchise they enjoyed. The movie just had to deliver something that justified that support. Instead, some fans walked away feeling like the price did not match the quality. And that is where the problem gets bigger than just the movie itself. A franchise depends on its fans to keep supporting new releases. They are the ones who buy tickets, purchase merchandise, and keep the series relevant. If those same people start questioning whether a release is worth their money, that is a major warning sign. You cannot expect casual viewers to be more excited about something than the people who already love it. If the biggest supporters are hesitant, disappointed, or openly saying they regret spending the extra money, then what message does that send to everyone else? A fan saying, "I did not enjoy this," is one thing. A fan saying, "I love this franchise, but I do not think this was worth paying extra for," is much more damaging. Because if the people who wanted this movie the most are not convinced it was worth the price, then convincing anyone else becomes an even harder challenge. And honestly, I agree with this fan. This movie is not worth $20. But the problem is, I would argue it is not even worth watching for free. That is how disappointing this release was. Even without spending any money, even without buying a ticket, and even without paying the extra premium price, it still feels like a waste of time. I watched this movie without paying for it, and I still walked away feeling ripped off. And that says a lot. Usually, if something is free, people are willing to be more forgiving. There is no financial investment, no feeling that you wasted your money, and no frustration over the price. You can simply watch it, move on, and forget about it. But when a movie is so underwhelming that you feel disappointed even after watching it for free, that means the problem is not the price. The problem is the movie itself. The $20 is just what makes the disappointment worse because fans were not paying for some random product. They were paying because they believed this was going to be a special Sword Art Online experience. They were paying because they cared about the franchise and wanted to support it. Instead, some fans feel like they paid extra for something that did not deliver. And even removing the money completely, the movie still has the same problems. The weak writing, the frustrating characters, the wasted potential, and the feeling that this could have been so much better are all still there. A great movie does not need excuses. It does not need fans to explain why you should overlook its flaws. It should be able to stand on its own and justify why people spent their time watching it. But when people are saying, "I would not even recommend this for free," that is one of the harshest criticisms a movie can receive, because money can be refunded. Time cannot. And if a movie cannot even convince people that their time was well spent, then it has failed at the most basic level. At this point, I am starting to wonder if the extra $20 paywall was not actually designed to get people to buy the movie. Maybe it was designed to keep people away from it. Because when even fans are saying the movie is not worth the extra cost, that raises some serious questions. The whole point of charging extra for a premium release is that it should feel like something special. It should feel like an event. It should make people think, I need to see this. Instead, the reaction from some viewers has been the complete opposite. People are looking at the price and thinking, why would I pay extra for this? And honestly, that is one of the biggest problems a movie can have. The audience should never have to be convinced that a product is worth watching. The quality should speak for itself. A $20 premium price creates expectations. It tells fans that they are not just getting another release. They are getting something worth paying more for. Something that deserves their time and money. But when the actual movie does not live up to that expectation, the paywall almost makes the disappointment worse. Instead of feeling like a special experience, it starts feeling like an obstacle. Fans who are already interested are being asked to spend more money, only to find out that even some supporters do not think the movie delivers enough value. And that creates an awkward situation. The people who should be rushing to buy it are the ones warning others not to. The people who should be promoting it are the ones saying, save your money. That is not exactly the kind of word of mouth a movie wants. A premium release should make fans feel rewarded for their support. It should make them excited that they got early access or a special experience. Instead, some fans feel like they paid extra just to be disappointed sooner. And when a movie's biggest challenge is convincing people it is worth watching in the first place, maybe the problem is not the audience. Maybe the movie simply did not earn the price tag. And maybe the most telling part of all is that even the fans seem to have run out of defenses for this movie. For years, Sword Art Online fans have been able to come up with an explanation for almost every criticism. Every problem had a reason. Every flaw had an excuse. Every controversial decision had someone ready to explain why it was actually misunderstood or secretly brilliant. But with this movie, those defenses are becoming much harder to find. Instead of fans passionately explaining why critics are wrong, some fans are simply admitting that the movie failed. They are not trying to justify the writing. They are not pretending every decision was genius. They are not coming up with reasons why everyone else just doesn't get it. They are saying they were disappointed, and that is a huge difference. When a franchise has a loyal fan base, there is usually a group of people willing to defend it no matter what. They will argue that the flaws do not matter, that the haters are exaggerating, or that people just need to appreciate the series for what it is. But this time, even some of the people who normally defend Sword Art Online are struggling to explain why this movie needed to exist. That is the real problem. It is not just that some people disliked the movie. It is that even fans are having trouble finding a reason to celebrate it. A movie made for the audience that already loved Sword Art Online somehow ended up leaving parts of that same audience wondering what the point of it was. A successful fan movie should make people excited. It should give fans something to talk about. It should strengthen their connection to the franchise. Instead, some fans are left trying to explain why they should care. And when the people most invested in a franchise cannot even justify its existence, that says a lot. Because fans are usually the last people to give up on something they love. So when even they start saying, this was not worth it, this was disappointing, or I do not know why this was made, that is a sign that the movie failed on a much deeper level. The critics did not break this movie. The movie did that itself. This comment is another example of how even some Sword Art Online fans are reaching their limit with this franchise. This person openly says they are a fan, but even they draw the line here. They are not someone who hates Sword Art Online. They are not someone who was never interested in the series. They are someone who already enjoys the franchise and still looks at this movie and says, no, this is not worth that kind of money. And that is a pretty brutal reaction. When a fan is willing to support a franchise but refuses to spend a premium price on a new release, that shows there is a serious lack of confidence. Fans are usually the people most willing to spend money because they already have an emotional connection. They want to support the creators and experience more of the world they enjoy. But there is a limit. At some point, fans have to ask whether what they are getting is actually worth the cost. And this comment makes that point clear. This person is basically saying that there are already better Sword Art Online experiences available, so why spend a ridiculous amount of money on something that does not seem to justify the price? That is a major problem for a franchise release. A new movie should feel like an upgrade. It should feel like a special event that gives fans something they cannot get anywhere else. It should make people excited to support it. Instead, some fans are looking at it and thinking, why would I pay for this when better content already exists? And that is probably one of the harshest criticisms a movie can receive. Not only are critics unimpressed, but even fans are questioning whether the experience is worth their time and money. The people who should be the easiest audience to convince are now the ones saying, I would rather watch something else. When your own fans are comparing your new release unfavorably to older content, that shows the problem is not just outside criticism. The franchise itself has failed to convince its biggest supporters that this movie deserves their attention. This fan refusing to pay to watch this movie is honestly understandable. And that is what makes this reaction so interesting. This is not someone who hates Sword Art Online. This is not someone who has no connection to the franchise. This person openly says they are a fan, which means they are exactly the type of viewer this movie should have been trying to satisfy. Yet even they looked at the price and decided it was not worth it. That is a pretty big problem. Fans are usually the first people willing to support a franchise. They are the ones who buy tickets, purchase merchandise, watch new releases, and keep the series alive. They already have the emotional investment that makes them more forgiving than the average viewer. So if even a fan is saying, no, I am not spending my money on this, that says a lot about the lack of confidence this movie created. And honestly, I cannot blame them. A $110 price tag is not a small ask, especially when the audience is already questioning whether the movie actually delivers something worthwhile. A premium release should feel like a must-watch experience. It should make fans excited to support it. Instead, some fans are looking at it and thinking there are better ways to spend their money. That is a major failure for something that is supposed to be a celebration of the franchise. The movie had every advantage. It had an established fan base. It had recognizable characters. It had the nostalgia of Aincrad. It had people who were already interested before they even saw a trailer. The audience was there. The support was there. The only thing left was to give fans a reason to pay for it. But when the fans themselves are saying, I would rather spend my money on something else, that shows the movie failed to create excitement even among the people most likely to support it. A franchise cannot expect casual viewers to care more than its own fans do. If the people who love Sword Art Online are not convinced this movie is worth buying, then that is probably the biggest warning sign possible. And perhaps the harshest part of this comment is that the movie was so disappointing that it actually felt AI-generated to this fan. That is not a small criticism. When someone compares a professionally produced movie to something that could have been generated by AI, they are basically saying it feels empty, artificial, and lacking the human creativity and passion that should go into a major franchise release. And again, this is coming from a fan. This is not someone who was already looking for a reason to hate Sword Art Online. This is someone who likes the franchise and wanted to see something worth celebrating. They are part of the exact audience this movie was made for. So for them to walk away feeling like the movie had the quality and effort of something thrown together by a machine is a brutal assessment. A franchise movie should feel like an event. It should feel like the creators understood what fans loved and put genuine effort into delivering something memorable. Instead, some fans felt like they were watching something that lacked personality. Something that had the surface-level elements of Sword Art Online but was missing the heart, creativity, and excitement that made people care in the first place. And that is what makes this reaction so damaging. AI-generated content is often criticized for feeling generic. It can copy familiar patterns, repeat ideas, and produce something technically recognizable without having any real emotion behind it. So when a fan says a movie feels AI-generated, they are not just saying it was bad. They are saying it felt soulless. They are saying it felt like the franchise name was there, the characters were there, and the setting was there, but the passion behind it was missing. And that is a terrible feeling for fans because they are not just looking for familiar names and references. They want something that respects their attachment to the series. The irony is that Sword Art Online has always been built around the idea of virtual worlds and artificial experiences, but even fans do not want their entertainment to feel artificial. They want something with creativity, emotion, and effort behind it. When fans start describing a movie as something that feels like it could have been made by AI, that shows how disconnected they felt from the final product. And when even the people who love the franchise are questioning whether there was any real passion behind it, that is one of the harshest criticisms possible. And honestly, saying this movie feels AI-generated is almost an insult to actual good AI-generated content. Because there is plenty of fan-made AI content out there that shows more creativity, passion, and effort than this movie seems to have. That is what makes the comparison so brutal. AI-generated content can still be interesting when someone puts thought into the idea behind it. Fans have used AI tools to create unique concepts, alternate stories, character ideas, and creative projects that clearly come from people who actually care about the material. Even if the technology is imperfect, there is still a sense of enthusiasm and imagination behind those projects. But when a professionally produced movie from an established franchise gets compared to AI-generated content, that says something about how disconnected some fans felt from the final product. The problem is not simply that the movie was flawed. Fans can forgive flaws. They can forgive lower budgets, awkward moments, or creative choices they disagree with. What is much harder to forgive is the feeling that nobody behind the project was truly trying. That is why the AI comparison hurts. It suggests the movie felt generic, predictable, and assembled from familiar pieces without much creativity or emotional investment behind it. And that is a terrible thing to say about a franchise like Sword Art Online. This series has always had a massive world full of possibilities. It has a premise that could create countless unique stories. It has characters that fans have followed for years. So when fans feel like a fan-made AI project has more energy and imagination than an official movie, that is a massive failure. The irony is that this movie was supposed to be a special experience for the fans. It was supposed to be a celebration of the franchise they loved. Instead, some fans feel like they got something less inspired than projects created by random people online in their spare time. When unofficial fan creations are making a paid, official release look bad, that is not a criticism of the fans. That is a criticism of the movie itself. And this person is absolutely right about there being multiple better movies you can watch online. That is what makes the decision to spend extra money on this movie even harder to justify. It is not like viewers are choosing between watching this and having nothing else to watch. There are countless movies, anime, and fan projects available that offer better stories, stronger writing, and more memorable experiences. The competition is everywhere. A movie does not exist in a vacuum. It has to earn the audience's attention. It has to convince people that their time and money are better spent watching it than the thousands of other options available. And that becomes a huge problem when even fans are saying, "Why should I pay for this when I could watch something better?" Because that is the reality of entertainment today. People have endless choices. If a movie feels lazy, disappointing, or underwhelming, audiences can easily move on to something else. The harshest part is that Sword Art Online already has a massive advantage. It has an established fan base, recognizable characters, and a world that millions of people are already familiar with. The movie did not have to fight for attention from strangers. It already had people willing to give it a chance. But instead of making fans feel like they were experiencing something special, some viewers felt like there were simply better ways to spend their time. And that is a terrible position for a franchise movie to be in. A fan should not be looking at a new release and thinking, "I would rather watch almost anything else." A movie based on a popular franchise should feel like an event. It should feel like something worth prioritizing. Instead, some fans are comparing it to random content they can find online and saying those alternatives are more enjoyable. When unofficial projects, older releases, and completely unrelated movies are more appealing than your newest entry, that is a sign that something went seriously wrong. Because the biggest challenge for any movie is not just getting people to watch it. It is convincing them that nothing else is a better use of their time. There are plenty of amazing movies you can watch for free online right now. So the obvious question is, why would anyone pay money to watch Unanswered Butterfly? That decision becomes much harder to justify when there are countless other options available that do not cost anything. Audiences today have access to an unbelievable amount of entertainment. There are classic movies, independent films, fan projects, documentaries, short films, and even full-length content available online for free. People are not limited to whatever new release is being pushed in front of them. A movie has to earn someone's time, and if it is asking people to spend extra money, it has to earn that money too. That is why the price becomes such a major issue. A premium release creates the expectation that you are getting something special, something memorable, something that feels like it deserves the additional cost. But when viewers are comparing Unanswered Butterfly to the endless amount of free content available online and deciding that the free options look more appealing, that is a serious problem. Especially when this is a franchise movie. Sword Art Online already has the advantage of having a built-in audience. Fans already know the characters. They already care about the world. They already have years of attachment to the series. The movie did not need to convince people to care. It only needed to convince them that this experience was worth paying for. And for some fans, it failed to do that. The question is not just, is this movie worth the money? The bigger question is, why would I spend the money on this when there are hundreds of other movies I could watch instead? That is the competition every piece of entertainment faces. It is not enough for a movie to simply exist. It has to stand out. It has to provide something that makes people choose it over everything else. When a fan looks at a paid movie and thinks they would rather watch free content online instead, that is one of the biggest failures a release can have. Because at that point, the problem is not the audience being unwilling to spend money. The problem is the movie failing to give them a reason to spend it. And the most telling part is that even some fans would rather spend their time watching other things. That is a huge problem for any franchise. Fans are supposed to be the easiest audience to satisfy. They are the people who already have an emotional connection to the series. They already care about the characters, the world, and the brand. They are the people who should be the most excited to watch a new release. But when even fans are looking at a new Sword Art Online movie and thinking, I would rather watch something else, that says a lot. Because this is not about people who were never interested in the franchise. This is not about critics who were already against Sword Art Online from the beginning. These are people who wanted to enjoy it. They were the audience this movie was created for. Yet even they are choosing other movies, other shows, or even free content online over this release. That means the movie failed to create excitement among the one group that should have been guaranteed to show up. A franchise can survive outside criticism. Every popular series has people who dislike it. But what is much harder to recover from is losing the enthusiasm of your own supporters. The goal of a fan movie is not just to get fans to watch it once. The goal is to make them excited. It should make them want to recommend it, talk about it, and share their love for the franchise. Instead, some fans are saying there are better ways to spend their time. And that is probably one of the harshest things a fan can say. They are not saying, this is not my type of movie. They are saying, there are countless other things I would rather watch. When your own audience starts looking elsewhere, that is a sign that something went seriously wrong. Because the biggest competition for any movie is not just other movies. It is the audience's attention. And if even the fans are choosing something else, then the movie has already lost the people who were supposed to support it the most. At this point, it is hard to look at the reaction to this movie and call it anything other than a failure on every level. It failed to satisfy the people who were supposed to love it. It failed to impress the people who were already invested in the franchise. It failed to justify its price. And worst of all, it failed to make fans excited about the future of Sword Art Online. That is a serious problem. A movie like this has one major advantage from the beginning. The audience is already there. It does not have to build a fan base from scratch. It does not have to convince people to care about the characters or the world. Sword Art Online already has years of history, millions of fans, and a dedicated audience willing to support new content. The movie had everything handed to it. All it had to do was deliver something enjoyable. Instead, some fans walked away feeling disappointed, frustrated, and even embarrassed to defend it. The writing was criticized. The characters were criticized. The pacing was criticized. The execution was criticized. Even the core setting of Aincrad, which should have been the easiest part to make exciting, left some fans feeling underwhelmed. That is not one small mistake. That is a complete failure to capitalize on what made the franchise popular. A successful fan movie should remind people why they became fans in the first place. It should create excitement, nostalgia, and appreciation for the series. Instead, some viewers felt like it reminded them of every criticism Sword Art Online has faced for years. And that is why the reaction from fans matters so much. Critics disliking a Sword Art Online movie is nothing new. The franchise has always had people who criticize it. But when the fans themselves start saying the movie was disappointing, unnecessary, or not worth the money, that is a much bigger warning sign. The people who wanted to enjoy it the most are the ones who felt let down. The people who should have been celebrating it are the ones questioning it. The people who should have defended it are the ones admitting it failed. And when a movie cannot even win over the audience it was specifically created for, that is about as clear of a sign of failure as you can get. Unanswered Butterfly was supposed to be a gift to Sword Art Online fans. Instead, for many of those fans, it became another example of everything they believe is wrong with the franchise. This comment is probably one of the funniest examples of a fan reaching their breaking point. The summary is basically, I love Sword Art Online. I have nostalgia for it. I still care about the franchise. But even I have to admit this movie is terrible. And honestly, that is a pretty devastating review. This person is not coming from a place of hatred. They are not someone who was waiting for an excuse to criticize Sword Art Online. They openly admit they love the series because of the nostalgia and the memories attached to it. They are exactly the type of person who should have enjoyed this movie. The bar was already set in the easiest possible place. They were not asking for a revolutionary masterpiece. They just wanted something that captured the feeling of Aincrad and gave fans a reason to be excited. Instead, they walked away saying it was pure ass, and that it deserved all the criticism it gets. That is not the reaction of someone who wanted to hate the movie. That is the reaction of someone who wanted to like it and could not. And then there is the price. The fact that this fan specifically calls out the $110 cost makes the disappointment even worse. Fans are usually the people most willing to spend money on a franchise they love. They will buy games, merchandise, and special editions because they want to support something they care about. But even this fan is saying the price is ridiculous. That means the problem is not just that critics disliked the movie. Even the people who are emotionally attached to Sword Art Online are questioning whether this release deserved their money. The funniest part, though, is what this fan actually wants. A good Aincrad game where players can experience the world themselves instead of everything revolving around Kirito and the main cast. And honestly, that complaint has existed for years. The original concept of Sword Art Online is literally about being trapped inside an MMO. The appeal is the idea of exploring a massive virtual world, forming your own party, fighting bosses, and experiencing Aincrad as a player. Yet so many adaptations keep focusing on the same characters instead of giving fans the experience they have been asking for. Fans do not just want to watch Kirito play the game. They want to feel like they are inside the game. And the fact that even fans are still asking for this after all these years shows how much potential Sword Art Online continues to waste. So the reaction is basically, I love this franchise. I want to support it. I want more of it. But please stop giving us disappointing releases and give us the actual experience we have been asking for. When even nostalgic fans are begging for something better, that tells you everything. And that is what makes this comment so interesting. This fan openly says they do not care what other people say about Sword Art Online. They still love the franchise. They still have nostalgia for it. They still consider themselves a fan. But at the same time, they are able to admit that this movie deserves criticism. And that is something some people seem to have trouble understanding. Liking a franchise does not mean you have to blindly defend everything it produces. Being a fan does not mean you have to pretend every release is amazing. You can love the overall series while still recognizing when a specific movie, game, or story fails. In fact, criticism from fans is often the most meaningful criticism because these are the people who actually want the franchise to succeed. This person did not watch the movie hoping it would fail. They were not trying to prove Sword Art Online is bad. They went in with nostalgia, excitement, and a genuine appreciation for the series. That is why their disappointment matters. A fan who dislikes a movie is not the same as a person who was never interested in the first place. This person already had every reason to enjoy it. They already liked the world, understood the appeal, and wanted another experience with the franchise. The movie had the easiest possible audience, and yet even they reached the conclusion that it was not good. That is probably the hardest criticism for a franchise to deal with because it cannot simply be dismissed as haters attacking again. This is coming from someone who wants to like Sword Art Online but cannot ignore the problems with this specific release. The irony is that some fans spend so much time arguing that critics should stop hating Sword Art Online, but then a fan comes along and proves that you can enjoy the franchise while still admitting when something deserves criticism. You do not have to choose between loving Sword Art Online and being honest about its flaws. A real fan can appreciate what they love while also admitting when something falls short. And if even the people who still love the franchise are saying this movie deserves to be roasted, then maybe the problem is not the critics. Maybe the movie actually earned the criticism. When even the fans do not think the movie is worth the money and feel like it deserves to be roasted, that says a lot. These are not people who were waiting for an excuse to attack Sword Art Online. These are the people who should have been the easiest audience to please. They already love the franchise. They already have nostalgia for the series. They already want to see more of this world. They are the people who should be defending it the loudest. But instead, some fans are joining in on the criticism because even they cannot pretend this movie delivered what it was supposed to. And that is what makes this reaction so damaging. A critic saying a Sword Art Online movie is bad is not surprising. The franchise has always had people who dislike it. But when a fan who genuinely enjoys the series says, "This is not worth the price," or "This deserves to be roasted," that carries a completely different weight, because fans are usually the last people to turn against something they love. They are usually willing to overlook flaws. They are usually willing to defend questionable choices. They are usually willing to give creators the benefit of the doubt because they want the franchise to succeed. So when even they reach the point where they are laughing at the movie instead of celebrating it, that shows just how badly it missed the mark. A fan movie is supposed to strengthen the relationship between a franchise and its audience. It should make people excited to talk about it. It should make fans proud to support it. Instead, some fans are treating it like something to be mocked. And that is probably one of the worst outcomes possible for any release. A movie can survive criticism from people who never liked it. It can survive online arguments and negative reviews from outsiders. But what is much harder to survive is disappointment from the people who wanted to love it. When the fans themselves are saying the movie is not worth their money, not worth defending, and deserves the criticism it receives, then maybe the problem is not that people are being too harsh. Maybe the movie simply earned the reaction it got. This fan also brings up something that Sword Art Online fans have been asking for years. A truly great Aincrad game where players can actually experience the world themselves. And honestly, that idea makes perfect sense. The entire appeal of Sword Art Online is the concept of being inside a virtual reality MMO. The fantasy is not just watching Kirito and Asuna clear floors while everyone else stands around. The fantasy is imagining yourself as a player inside Aincrad, creating your own character, joining a guild, exploring the floors, fighting bosses, making choices, and experiencing the world as if you were actually trapped there. That is the concept that made people interested in the first place. But unfortunately, that is probably never going to happen in the way fans imagine. A proper Aincrad MMO experience would require an enormous amount of time, money, and development effort. It would not just be another quick anime tie-in game. It would require a massive world, dozens of unique areas, hundreds of quests, multiplayer systems, combat mechanics, progression, customization, and enough content to make players feel like they are actually living inside the game. That is a huge investment. And the problem is that companies often do not want to take that risk when they can make something cheaper and faster using the Sword Art Online name alone. Why spend years creating a massive, ambitious MMO when they can release a smaller game, reuse familiar characters, add some fan service, and rely on the franchise name to sell copies? That is the frustrating part for fans. The potential is right there. Sword Art Online is literally about a virtual world, yet fans keep getting games that feel more like interactive versions of the anime rather than actual MMO experiences. Instead of letting players become part of Aincrad, they keep putting the focus back on the same characters and the same story beats. Fans do not just want another retelling of Kirito's adventure. They want their own adventure. They want to experience the world that made them fall in love with the franchise. But that would require actual ambition. It would require taking a risk and investing in something bigger than a quick cash grab. And unfortunately, the safer option is usually the one companies choose. Why create a massive, expensive game that could take years to develop when you can release a lower-effort title, attach the Sword Art Online branding, and sell it to the existing fanbase? That is why fans keep asking for the same thing and keep getting disappointed. The frustrating irony is that Sword Art Online has one of the easiest concepts in the world to turn into an amazing game. The entire franchise is built around a game. And yet the hardest thing for the franchise to deliver is the one thing fans actually want. A game that feels like Sword Art Online. This fan probably should not hold their breath waiting for a truly great Sword Art Online game, because at this point, it feels like that dream is never going to happen. And that is probably the most frustrating part for fans. The concept is already sitting right there. Sword Art Online is literally a franchise about a virtual reality MMO. The entire appeal is built around the idea of entering a massive digital world and experiencing it yourself. A great game adaptation should be the easiest thing to make. The foundation is already there. You have Aincrad, a giant floating castle with 100 floors. You have different weapon types, classes, guilds, boss battles, exploration, player interactions, and a world designed around the idea of becoming stronger over time. It sounds like the perfect setup for an amazing RPG or MMO. But year after year, fans keep asking for that experience and keep getting something else. Instead of a game where players can truly create their own story, they get games that mostly revolve around replaying Kirito's journey, watching familiar scenes, and following the same characters they have already seen countless times. At some point, fans have to wonder if the people making these games even understand what the appeal of Sword Art Online actually is. The fantasy was never just watching Kirito be powerful. The fantasy was being a player in that world. It was imagining yourself logging in, joining a party, exploring unknown floors, defeating bosses, and creating your own memories inside Aincrad. But creating that kind of game would require a massive investment. It would require years of development, a large team, and the willingness to take a serious risk. And that is exactly why it probably will not happen. A smaller, safer game using recognizable characters is much easier to produce. Costs less, takes less time, and still has the Sword Art Online name attached to it. From a business perspective, that is the easier choice. From a fan perspective, it is incredibly disappointing, because fans are not asking for something impossible. They are asking for the one thing the franchise has always promised, the feeling of actually being inside the game. But after years of adaptations, it is starting to look like the closest fans will ever get to experiencing Aincrad is imagining the game that should have existed. So this fan wanting a true Aincrad experience is understandable. The problem is that they might be waiting forever, because the perfect Sword Art Online game is exactly the kind of thing fans have wanted for years, and unfortunately, it is also the kind of thing the franchise seems least interested in actually making. And there is another problem with this fan's dream of a perfect Aincrad game. Sword Art Online itself is not actually a very good game. The idea sounds amazing on paper, but the actual game design behind Aincrad has a lot of problems. I have already made several videos breaking down the flaws with Sword Art Online as an MMO concept, from the questionable mechanics to the terrible design decisions that would make the game frustrating to play in real life. Because the reality is, if Aincrad existed as an actual game exactly the way it is portrayed in Sword Art Online, it would probably be a massive failure. The premise is exciting because of the story surrounding it. Being trapped in a virtual world where your life is on the line sounds intense. The idea of exploring a giant floating castle, fighting bosses, and becoming stronger sounds like the perfect MMO fantasy. But when you actually look at the systems behind it, the cracks start to show. A real MMO needs balance. It needs good progression. It needs engaging gameplay loops. It needs mechanics that keep players interested for hundreds or even thousands of hours. Aincrad mostly works because it is a fictional setting built around drama and adventure. It is designed to create exciting moments for a story, not necessarily to be a fun and sustainable game. And that is the difference fans sometimes overlook. A world can be amazing in an anime and still make for a terrible video game. Just because something sounds cool does not mean it would actually work as a playable experience. A game where players are forced to risk their lives because of permanent death, where one mistake can erase years of progress, and where the entire world is controlled by a limited number of floors would probably drive away a lot of players rather than attract them. The same things that make Aincrad interesting as a story are the things that could make it frustrating as an actual MMO. So while fans want a game where they can live inside Aincrad, I have to wonder if they actually want the game that Sword Art Online created, or if they just want the fantasy version of it. Because those are two very different things. I think a lot of fans want the feeling of Sword Art Online, exploring the world, making friends, fighting monsters, and creating memories. But if someone actually released an exact replica of Aincrad with all of its original mechanics, I doubt many people would stick around. They do not want the actual game. They want the idea of the game. And unfortunately, turning that fantasy into a genuinely great MMO would require completely redesigning what Sword Art Online's game actually is. Sword Art Online would be an awful game to play if it was real. And that might sound strange because the entire appeal of the series is built around the fantasy of entering a virtual world and experiencing Aincrad for yourself. The idea sounds incredible at first. A massive floating castle, hundreds of floors to explore, monsters to fight, powerful bosses to defeat, and the ability to actually live inside an MMO. But once you stop looking at it as an anime setting and start looking at it as an actual game, the problems become obvious. A real MMO needs to be fun first and dangerous second. It needs to reward players for investing their time, encourage experimentation, and give people reasons to keep playing. Sword Art Online's version of Aincrad does the exact opposite. The biggest issue is the death system. Permanent death might work for a dramatic story, but as an actual game mechanic, it would be horrible. Imagine spending months or even years leveling up your character, collecting rare equipment, building relationships with your guild, and then losing everything because of one mistake, one bad connection, one unfair boss mechanic, or one moment where you were not paying attention. Most players would quit immediately. A game is supposed to be an escape. People play MMOs to relax, socialize, and have fun. Turning every battle into a potential life-ending situation would make the entire experience stressful instead of enjoyable. And that is before even getting into the actual MMO design. Where are the updates? Where are the balance patches? Where are the new classes, expansions, and quality of life improvements? How would the economy work? How would new players catch up? How would the game prevent veteran players from completely dominating everything? These are the types of issues that real MMO developers spend years solving. But Sword Art Online mostly ignores them because Aincrad exists as a storytelling device, not as a carefully designed video game. The world is interesting because of the situation surrounding it. It is interesting because the characters are trapped and fighting for survival. Remove the life or death stakes, and you are left with a game that might not actually be very fun. The irony is that Sword Art Online fans often say they want to experience Aincrad themselves, but I think many people are imagining the adventure, not the actual gameplay. They imagine exploring a beautiful fantasy world, fighting alongside friends, and becoming a legendary player. They are not imagining spending hours grinding levels, dealing with frustrating mechanics, losing progress permanently, or getting stuck on a boss because thousands of players cannot clear it. The fantasy of Aincrad is amazing. The actual game design behind Aincrad is a nightmare. If Sword Art Online existed exactly as shown in the anime, it would not be the dream MMO everyone imagines. It would probably be one of the most frustrating games ever created. A real Sword Art Online would probably fail harder than games like Ashes of Creation, and that is saying something. Because while the idea sounds amazing as an anime concept, as an actual MMO it would be a complete nightmare to develop, balance, and maintain. Fans imagine the dream version of Sword Art Online, entering a massive virtual world, exploring Aincrad, fighting monsters with friends, becoming stronger, and creating your own legendary story. But the actual game shown in the series has so many problems that it would likely collapse under its own design. A real MMO cannot just rely on a cool premise. It needs systems that work. It needs progression that feels rewarding. It needs combat that is balanced. It needs content that can keep millions of players engaged for years. Sword Art Online's biggest selling point is also its biggest weakness. The game is designed around the idea that failure has extreme consequences. Permanent death, limited resources, and brutal difficulty might create tension in a story, but as an actual MMO, those systems would drive most players away. Imagine spending hundreds of hours leveling your character, collecting rare gear, and building your reputation, only to lose everything because of one mistake. That is not exciting gameplay for most people. That is a reason to uninstall. And then there is the development side. Creating a true Aincrad MMO would be an enormous undertaking. A 100-floor world with unique environments, enemies, bosses, quests, economy systems, classes, crafting, PvP, guilds, and player-driven content would require an insane amount of time and money. This is not something a company could just throw together. And that is why the dream version of Sword Art Online will probably never happen. The amount of investment required would be massive, while the actual mechanics of the game would still have serious problems. The funny thing is that fans want the feeling of Sword Art Online more than the actual game. They want the adventure. They want the fantasy. They want to feel like they are inside a living virtual world. But if you gave them the exact game from the anime, many players would probably realize it is not the masterpiece they imagined. It would be stressful, punishing, and filled with design choices that would make modern MMO players quit almost immediately. A real Sword Art Online would not be the future of gaming. It would probably be a cautionary example of why making a cool fictional MMO is much easier than making a good real one. The fantasy of Aincrad is incredible. The actual game design behind it is a disaster waiting to happen. And another major problem with this idea is that we do not even have full-dive virtual reality in real life. That completely changes the conversation. A big reason Sword Art Online seems so appealing is because the technology in the series is basically magic. The Nerve Gear allows players to completely disconnect from the real world and enter a virtual environment with all 5 senses. You are not just looking at a screen. You are not just holding a controller. You are actually there. That is the fantasy. And without that technology, a real Sword Art Online game would not feel anything like the experience shown in the anime. At the end of the day, it would just be another video game played on a monitor, television, or VR headset. You would still be sitting in a room. You would still be using physical controls. You would still have the limitations of modern gaming technology. You would not actually feel like you were standing in Aincrad. You would not feel the weight of your weapon. You would not feel the danger of a boss battle. You would not experience the world as if it were reality. And that is a huge part of what makes Sword Art Online's world interesting. The series is not just about an MMO. It is about the idea of an MMO becoming a second reality. Remove the full dive technology, and a lot of that magic disappears. A company could make a Sword Art Online-inspired MMO today, but it would not be the same thing fans imagine. It would be limited by current technology. It would still have menus, loading screens, traditional controls, and all the things that remind you that you are playing a game. The irony is that the biggest appeal of Sword Art Online is also the one thing we cannot realistically recreate yet. Fans want to experience Aincrad like Kirito and Asuna did, but the technology required to make that possible does not exist. So even if someone spent billions creating the most accurate Sword Art Online game possible, it would still fall short of the fantasy. Because they would not actually be creating Sword Art Online. They would be creating a normal MMO with a Sword Art Online skin. And that is a huge difference. The franchise is built around a future version of gaming that we simply do not have yet. Until true full-dive virtual reality exists, the closest anyone can get to Sword Art Online is still just watching the anime and imagining what it would be like. The dream of Aincrad is incredible. The problem is that the technology needed to make that dream real is still science fiction. Even if someone somehow managed to create an exact replica of Sword Art Online tomorrow, it still would not actually be Sword Art Online. Because the biggest difference is the one thing we do not have: full dive virtual reality. That is the entire foundation of the fantasy. In the anime, players are not sitting in front of a screen or wearing a normal VR headset. They are completely transported into another world. They can see, hear, move, and interact with Aincrad as if it is reality. The Nerve Gear is not just a gaming device. It is basically a gateway into another existence. Without that technology, the experience is fundamentally different. You could recreate every floor of Aincrad. You could copy every monster, every boss fight, every weapon, every quest, and every mechanic from the anime. But at the end of the day, you would still just be playing a video game. You would still be sitting in a chair. You would still be looking at a screen or wearing a limited VR headset. You would still know that you are outside of the world. That completely changes the experience. A huge part of Sword Art Online's appeal is the immersion, the feeling that the game is not something you are playing, but somewhere you are actually visiting. And that is something modern gaming simply cannot recreate yet. A realistic VR version of Aincrad would be impressive, but it would still be a compromise. It would be closer to a theme park ride than actually living inside the world. The irony is that many fans want the exact opposite. They do not just want a Sword Art Online game. They want the feeling of Sword Art Online. They want to wake up in Aincrad. They want to walk through the towns, fight alongside other players, and feel like they are truly part of the world. But that requires technology that does not exist. So even if a company announced tomorrow that they were making a perfect 1:1 recreation of Sword Art Online, it would still fall short of what fans imagine. Because they would not be creating the future of gaming. They would be creating a very ambitious VR game with a Sword Art Online skin. And those are two completely different things. The world of Sword Art Online is built on a fantasy that gaming technology has not caught up to yet. Until Full Dive VR becomes reality, the true Aincrad experience will remain exactly what it has always been. A cool idea that works better in fiction than it does as an actual game. And even if Full Dive VR did exist, there is still another problem. A lot of fans probably would not actually be satisfied with the experience. Because they would not get to be Kirito. They would not be the main character. They would not be the most important player in the entire game. And that is a huge difference between the fantasy of Sword Art Online and the reality of playing an actual MMO. A lot of the appeal of Aincrad comes from watching Kirito's journey. He is the player who discovers hidden mechanics, defeats impossible bosses, becomes one of the strongest players, and ends up at the center of every major event. But in a real MMO, millions of people would be logging in. You would not be the chosen one. You would not be the person who every important character cares about. You would not be the legendary player everyone talks about. You would just be another player among thousands or even millions. And that is probably where the fantasy would start falling apart for a lot of fans. Because Sword Art Online makes the MMO experience look like a personal adventure where the main character is always at the center of the story. Real MMOs do not work like that. Most players are not the hero who saves the world. Most players are not defeating the final boss first. Most players are not forming legendary relationships with the strongest characters in the game. They are grinding. They are farming materials. They are completing side quests. They are waiting for parties. They are doing the same repetitive activities that every MMO player does. The reality of an MMO is that most people are background characters in someone else's story. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. That is actually part of what makes MMOs interesting. Everyone has their own smaller adventures. Everyone creates their own memories. But it is very different from Sword Art Online's version, where the entire world seems to revolve around Kirito. Even with perfect full dive technology, fans would still have to accept that they are not entering Aincrad as the protagonist. They are entering it as one player in a massive world. They would not get Kirito's abilities. They would not get Kirito's importance. They would not have every major event somehow revolve around them. They would just be another person trying to survive and make a name for themselves. And honestly, that might be the biggest reality check of all. Fans do not just want to experience Sword Art Online. A lot of them want to experience being Kirito. But those are two completely different things. Playing a real MMO would not be nearly as glamorous as Sword Art Online makes it look. That is another thing the series does not really capture. The average player experience. In the anime, everything feels like a grand adventure. Every floor has a major event. Every battle feels important. Every character seems connected to the main storyline. Kirito is constantly discovering secrets, defeating powerful enemies, saving people, and somehow ending up at the center of everything. But that is not how real MMOs work. In an actual MMO, most players are not the hero of the story. You are not constantly saving the world. You are not always fighting the strongest enemies. You are not walking into every major event and becoming the person everyone remembers. Most of the time, you are just another player. You are farming materials. You are grinding experience. You are running the same dungeon multiple times hoping for a rare drop. You are looking for a party that does not fall apart after 5 minutes. You are spending hours improving your gear just to become slightly stronger. That is the reality of MMO gameplay. The fantasy is exciting because Sword Art Online skips over a lot of the ordinary parts and focuses on the dramatic moments. It shows the highlights, not the everyday experience. And then there is the other fantasy that the series pushes. The idea that everyone around you will immediately recognize how special you are. In Sword Art Online, Kirito walks into the game and somehow becomes the most interesting person in the room. He is powerful, mysterious, skilled, and constantly surrounded by people who admire him, especially the romance side of things. The idea that you would enter a game and instantly have multiple people become interested in you is pure fantasy. In a real MMO, nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares that you are the strongest player unless you actually prove it. Nobody is automatically impressed because you have a cool character design or a rare weapon. And no, a bunch of people are not going to instantly fall in love with you just because you are good at the game. Real online communities do not work like that. The average MMO player is not living a fantasy where they are the unstoppable hero surrounded by admirers. They are just another person behind a character trying to have fun. And that is perfectly fine. The problem is that Sword Art Online sells this exaggerated version of the MMO experience where everyone can become Kirito. But in reality, most players would not be the legendary solo player who changes the course of the game. They would be the person standing in town watching someone else get all the attention. The fantasy of being the main character is appealing. The reality of being one player among millions is much less glamorous. At this point, this fan might want to give up on the dream of a true Sword Art Online game, because the reality is probably never going to match the fantasy. And the reason is that the version of Sword Art Online fans want is not just a video game. They want the full experience. They want to enter Aincrad and actually feel like they are there. They want the freedom of an MMO, the immersion of full dive VR, the excitement of exploring an unknown world, and the feeling that they are creating their own legendary adventure. But every single part of that fantasy is a massive obstacle. We do not have full dive technology. We do not have the ability to completely transfer a person's consciousness into a virtual world. We do not have the technology that would make Aincrad feel like a second reality. And even if we did, the actual game design from Sword Art Online would still have major problems. The real game would not revolve around you. You would not be Kirito. You would not be the strongest player. You would not be the person who saves everyone and becomes the center of attention. You would just be another player. The reality is that millions of people would log in, and most of them would not become legendary heroes. Most players would not discover secret skills, defeat impossible bosses, or have every major character impressed by them. They would just be grinding, leveling, farming, and trying to keep up. That is the part Sword Art Online does not really show. It shows the fantasy of being the main character, not the reality of being one player in a massive online world. And that is why a true Sword Art Online experience is probably impossible to recreate. The franchise is built around a fantasy that is much bigger than just making a game. It requires technology we do not have, gameplay systems that would probably frustrate players, and a story structure that only works because the player character is artificially placed at the center of everything. So while wanting a real Aincrad game is understandable, fans might have to accept that the version they imagine is never going to exist. Because the thing they actually want is not just Sword Art Online as a game. They want Sword Art Online as a reality. And until technology catches up with that fantasy, the Aincrad experience is going to remain exactly where it has always been, inside the anime. This comment is another example of a fan who is basically the exact target audience for Sword Art Online admitting that this special failed. And that is what makes this reaction so damaging. This is not someone who dislikes Sword Art Online. This is not someone who has spent years criticizing the franchise. This person actually goes out of their way to defend Sword Art Online, and they even point out that they consider the progressive light novels to be one of the best versions of the series. They are clearly someone who wants Sword Art Online to succeed. They are familiar with the franchise. They understand the appeal. They have invested time into the better parts of the series. And yet, even they cannot defend this. That is a pretty brutal place for a release to end up. When someone who is usually one of the first people to defend a franchise says, "No, this is bad," that is not just another random criticism. That is someone who already gave the movie every possible advantage. They wanted to like it. They were already on board. They already had a connection to the world. But even with all of that goodwill, the special still managed to frustrate them. And their complaints are especially telling because they are not just saying, "I didn't like the story." They are pointing out specific problems with the writing and character development. The main character repeatedly fails to learn from her mistakes. The same problems happen over and over again with no real growth. Characters are put into situations where they should struggle, only for the story to ignore its own stakes moments later. That is one of the most frustrating things for viewers because it makes the conflict feel pointless. If a character gets defeated, learns nothing, and then immediately overcomes the exact same challenge without meaningful development, then what was the point of the struggle in the first place? It removes the tension, it removes the satisfaction, and it makes the audience wonder why they should care. The comment about the boss fights is also a major issue. If a boss is presented as a serious threat, nearly defeating a character moments before, then suddenly getting destroyed without a convincing reason, it makes the entire challenge feel fake. The story is basically telling viewers, "This is dangerous," and then immediately saying, "Actually, never mind." That destroys the impact. And what makes this even funnier is that this person is still trying to find positives. They compliment the animation style and compare it to the better-looking Sword Art Online games. They are not just throwing a tantrum. They are clearly looking for something to appreciate. But even after finding things they liked, they still come to the conclusion that the special itself is frustrating and disappointing. That is the problem with this release. Even fans who are willing to defend Sword Art Online are separating their love for the franchise from the quality of this specific project. They can enjoy Sword Art Online. They can appreciate the world. They can like certain adaptations. But they can also admit when something does not work. And that is exactly what this comment shows. When even the defenders are saying, "I love this franchise, but this special is bad," that is a much bigger warning sign than any criticism from outside the fanbase. And that is probably the biggest red flag of all. When the fans who have defended Sword Art Online through everything cannot even defend this movie, you know something went seriously wrong. Because these are not casual viewers. These are the people who have spent years explaining why the franchise deserves more credit. These are the people who have pushed back against criticism, defended the writing, defended the characters, and found reasons to enjoy even the most controversial parts of the series. They are the fans who usually find something positive no matter what. A questionable story decision? They will explain why it works. A weak character moment? They will explain the deeper meaning behind it. A criticized arc? They will argue that people just do not understand it. Sword Art Online has always had a very dedicated fanbase that is willing to defend the franchise because they genuinely love it. So when even those fans reach a point where they say, "No, this is bad," that reaction carries a lot more weight. Because they are not looking for reasons to hate it. They are looking for reasons to enjoy it. They went into this wanting another great Sword Art Online experience. They wanted something that reminded them why they became fans in the first place. Instead, they walked away frustrated. And that is what makes this release different from normal criticism. A critic saying a Sword Art Online project is bad is expected. The franchise has always had people who dislike it. But when the people who normally defend the franchise start agreeing with the criticism, that means the usual excuses are not working anymore. They cannot just say, "You do not understand Sword Art Online." They cannot just say, "You are not the target audience." Because the target audience is literally telling them the same thing. The people this movie was made for are the ones saying it failed. And that is probably the hardest criticism any franchise can receive. A series can survive outside negativity. It can survive people who never liked it. What it struggles to survive is losing the enthusiasm of its own supporters. When the biggest fans are no longer trying to convince everyone else that a release is secretly good, but are instead admitting that it has major problems, that is when you know the franchise has a serious issue. Because if the people who have defended everything else cannot defend this, then who exactly is left to defend it? And what makes this even worse is that even the fans themselves found the movie frustrating. These are the people who usually give Sword Art Online the benefit of the doubt. They are the people who want to see the best in the franchise. They are willing to overlook flaws, defend questionable decisions, and explain why certain choices actually work. But even they reached a breaking point with this movie. One of the biggest complaints was the main character herself. Instead of feeling like someone fans could root for, many viewers found her frustrating because of how little she seemed to learn from her mistakes. The movie repeatedly puts her in situations where she should grow, adapt, or realize the consequences of her actions, but instead it feels like she keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again. That becomes exhausting to watch. A character does not have to be perfect, but they do need to develop. They need to learn from their failures. They need to show some kind of progression. Otherwise, the audience starts wondering why they should care. If a character can ignore every lesson, make the same bad decisions, and still win through the power of the plot, then the entire journey starts to feel pointless. And that is especially damaging in a story built around an MMO. The appeal of a game world is progression. Players get stronger because they learn, improve, and overcome challenges. But when the main character does not seem to actually improve and instead just gets rewarded anyway, it breaks the feeling that the world has any real rules. The funny part is that this criticism is coming from fans who are already familiar with Sword Art Online style. They understand the franchise. They know what to expect. They are not demanding something completely different. They just wanted a character and story that gave them a reason to care. Instead, even fans who came in wanting to enjoy the experience ended up frustrated with the writing. And that is probably one of the harshest criticisms a character can receive. It is one thing for outsiders to dislike a character. It is another thing when the people who already love the franchise are saying, "I wanted to like this, but this character is making it difficult." When even the fans are getting annoyed by the protagonist, frustrated by the story, and unable to defend the decisions being made, that is a sign that something went seriously wrong. The people who should have been cheering for this character were the ones getting tired of watching her. If even the Sword Art Online fans do not like the movie, then who exactly is supposed to enjoy it? That is the biggest problem this release has. The entire purpose of a franchise movie is to appeal to the people who already care about the franchise. The fans are supposed to be the safest audience. They are the people who know the characters, understand the references, and are already invested in the world. They are the people who should be walking away excited. But when even those fans are saying the movie is disappointing, frustrating, or not worth defending, that raises a very important question. Who was this actually made for? Because it clearly was not made for critics. Critics were never the target audience. It was never going to win over people who already disliked Sword Art Online. It was supposed to be made for the fans, the people who still love Aincrad, the people who still care about the characters, the people who have defended the franchise for years. And yet those same people are some of the ones expressing the most disappointment. That is what makes this reaction so damaging. It is easy to dismiss criticism from outsiders by saying, they were never going to like it anyway. But when the people who wanted to like it are saying it failed, that excuse becomes much harder to use. These fans came in with nostalgia. They came in with excitement. They came in wanting another reason to celebrate Sword Art Online. Instead, some of them walked away feeling like the movie wasted an opportunity. A franchise cannot survive forever by relying only on the loyalty of its audience. Eventually, fans expect something that rewards their support. They want a story that respects their time. They want characters they can root for. They want a reason to be excited. But when the audience that is already emotionally invested starts questioning the quality of the product, that is a massive warning sign. The irony is that Sword Art Online has one of the most dedicated fan bases out there. These are people who have stuck with the series through years of criticism and controversy. So if even they are saying, "No, this one does not work," then that is not just normal negativity. That is a sign that the movie failed to connect with the exact people it was created to entertain. When your own fans are not the ones defending your movie, you have to wonder who is left to defend it. At this point, the only unanswered question about this movie is who it was actually made for. Because the more you look at the reaction, the harder it becomes to figure out who the target audience was supposed to be. It was not made for critics, but that is not surprising. Critics were never going to be the easiest group to win over. It was not made for people who dislike Sword Art Online, because they were already unlikely to be interested. So that leaves the fans. The people who have supported the franchise for years. The people who still love Aincrad. The people who are willing to buy merchandise, play the games, and show up for new releases. They should have been the priority. They should have been the audience this movie was designed to make happy. But instead, some of the strongest criticism is coming from those exact fans. That creates a very strange situation where the people who were supposed to be celebrating the movie are the ones questioning why it exists in the first place. A fan release should make fans feel rewarded. It should remind them why they became fans. It should give them something exciting to talk about. Instead, some viewers are walking away frustrated, disappointed, and even embarrassed that this was supposed to represent the franchise they enjoy. And that leads to the biggest problem. If the fans are not satisfied and everyone else was never the intended audience, then who was this for? Was it for people discovering Sword Art Online for the first time? Because a confusing entry point filled with criticized characters and questionable writing is not exactly the best advertisement for the franchise. Was it for longtime fans? Because many of them seemed to feel like they were let down. Was it for people who just wanted a quality movie? Because even some fans are saying there are better things they could spend their time and money on. That is the strange legacy of this release. The biggest mystery is not what happened in the story. The biggest mystery is why this story was made the way it was. Because a franchise movie should have a clear purpose. It should know exactly who it wants to entertain. But when even the dedicated fans are asking, who was this made for? That might be the harshest criticism possible. A movie can survive being disliked. What is much harder to survive is being unwanted. And maybe the most embarrassing part for the franchise is that some fans are not even trying to defend this movie anymore. For years, Sword Art Online fans have been known for standing by the series no matter what criticism it receives. Whenever a new controversy happens, there are always fans ready to explain why the writing is actually misunderstood, why the criticism is unfair, or why people should appreciate what the franchise is trying to do. But this time, something feels different. Some fans are not rushing to defend it. They are not making excuses. They are not trying to convince everyone that the movie is secretly brilliant. Instead, they are openly admitting that it disappointed them. And that is a much bigger problem than outside criticism. A franchise can always dismiss critics as people who were never going to like it. Can say that certain viewers do not understand the series or that they are just looking for reasons to hate it. But when fans themselves are saying they are disappointed, frustrated, or even embarrassed by the release, that argument becomes much harder to make. These are the people who wanted this movie to succeed. They wanted something they could proudly share with other fans. They wanted another great Sword Art Online experience. They wanted a release that reminded everyone why they loved the franchise. Instead, some fans feel like they were given something they have to apologize for. That is a terrible position for any fan base to be in. Being a fan should be something people enjoy. It should be something they are excited to talk about. But when a new release makes fans hesitant to defend it, that shows how badly it failed to connect with its own audience. The harsh reality is that the strongest supporters are often the hardest people to disappoint because they already want to like the product. They are willing to overlook flaws. They are willing to give it a chance. They are willing to find the positives. So when even those people finally say, "No, this is not good," that says more than any negative review ever could. The biggest problem with this movie is not just that critics disliked it. It is that some fans are no longer interested in fighting for it. The people who were supposed to be its biggest defenders are now the ones admitting it failed. And what makes this reaction even more surprising is that the fans are not staying quiet about their disappointment. They are not just silently moving on. They are openly admitting that the movie was bad. That is a major difference. Usually, when a franchise has a dedicated fan base, there is at least some effort to defend new releases. Fans will highlight the positives, explain away the flaws, or argue that critics are being too harsh. But with this movie, some fans are doing the opposite. They are the ones calling out the problems. They are the ones saying the writing was disappointing. They are the ones saying the characters were frustrating. They are the ones admitting that the movie did not live up to expectations. And that is probably one of the harshest forms of criticism a franchise can receive. Because these fans are not outsiders looking for a reason to hate Sword Art Online. They are people who already love the series and wanted another reason to support it. They are the audience that should have been celebrating this release. Instead, they are openly saying it failed. The usual defense of "you just do not understand Sword Art Online" becomes much harder to use when the people making the criticism are the actual fans themselves. They understand the franchise. They understand the characters. They understand what makes Sword Art Online appealing. And even with that knowledge, they still walked away disappointed. That means the problem is not simply that critics are being unfair. It means the movie failed to deliver something that even longtime supporters could enjoy. A fan base admitting disappointment is normal. No franchise is perfect, and fans will always have different opinions. But when a large number of fans are not just disappointed but actively calling out the movie's flaws, refusing to defend it, and agreeing with the criticism, that shows how badly it missed the mark. The most loyal fans are usually the last people to give up on something they love. So when they are the ones saying, "No, this was not good," that reaction deserves attention. Because the harshest critics of this movie are not just the people who never cared about Sword Art Online. They are the people who cared enough to hope for something better. Fans should not be the ones spreading negativity about the thing they supposedly love. Normally, fans are the people who are supposed to celebrate a franchise. They are supposed to be excited about new releases, share their favorite moments, talk about what they enjoy, and show other people why they became fans in the first place. That is the entire point of being a fan. You support the things you love. And yet, here we are. Instead of fans celebrating a new Sword Art Online release, some of the loudest reactions are fans explaining why it disappointed them. Instead of talking about how much they enjoyed the movie, they are talking about how frustrating it was, how disappointing it felt, and why they cannot defend it. That is not the kind of conversation a franchise wants surrounding a new release. The most dedicated fans should be the ones creating excitement. They should be the ones telling people, "You need to watch this," or "This is why Sword Art Online is special." But when even fans are openly criticizing a project, that shows how badly it failed to create the reaction it was supposed to create. And the irony is that these are not people who want to see Sword Art Online fail. They are people who wanted a reason to celebrate it. They wanted something that reminded them why they loved the franchise. They wanted something they could proudly support. Instead, they ended up becoming some of the harshest critics. A franchise can survive criticism from people who were never fans. It can dismiss negativity from outsiders who already disliked it. But it is much harder to ignore disappointment from the people who were already on your side. When your own supporters are the ones saying a release was a mistake, that it was not worth the money, or that it failed to deliver, that is a much bigger problem. Fans should be celebrating the things they love. They should not be forced to defend why something they supported let them down. But when a new release gives fans more reasons to complain than reasons to celebrate, that says everything about the state of the franchise. And maybe the biggest sign that this movie failed is that the people who usually defend Sword Art Online do not even have anything to defend anymore. That is a rare situation for this franchise. Sword Art Online has always had a very passionate group of supporters who are willing to argue for it. No matter how much criticism the series receives, there are always fans ready to explain why certain choices were misunderstood, why certain storylines work, or why critics are being too harsh. They have defended the franchise through years of controversy. They have defended the writing. They have defended the characters. They have defended the creative decisions. But with this movie, even some of those same fans are struggling to find anything positive to say. And that is what makes the reaction so interesting. It is not that fans suddenly stopped caring about Sword Art Online. It is the opposite. They cared enough to be disappointed. They wanted to enjoy this. They wanted another release they could celebrate. They wanted another reason to talk about why they love the franchise. Instead, they are left criticizing the very thing they were supposed to be excited about. When the most dedicated defenders of a franchise cannot come up with a strong argument for why something is good, that says a lot. Because these are the people who usually find the positives. They are usually the ones saying, "Give it a chance." They are usually the ones saying, "You have to understand the context." They are usually the ones fighting back against every negative review. But this time, even they are admitting that the problems are too obvious to ignore. And that is probably the hardest type of criticism for any franchise to receive. It is easy to dismiss someone who never liked the series. It is easy to say a critic was biased or that they were never the target audience. But when the people who love the franchise are the ones saying, "No, this did not work," there is not much left to argue. The defenders are not silent because they do not care. They are quiet because even they cannot find a convincing defense. When the people who have spent years protecting Sword Art Online cannot protect one of its newest releases, that might be the clearest sign that the movie failed to deliver what fans were hoping for. This comment actually represents one of the more interesting reactions to the movie because, unlike the usual blind defenses, this person is a genuine Sword Art Online fan who paid to see it and still openly admits that many of the criticisms are valid. They basically watched the movie, recognized that Rex is exactly the kind of stereotypical debate-me internet personality that the story was trying to portray, and even joked that he comes across like an incel. They also admit that Amiron's character can be annoying and that the movie has plenty of problems, especially with how much time is spent focusing on her. And that says a lot. This is not someone who went into the movie wanting it to fail. This is someone who already loves Sword Art Online, already enjoys the world, and was willing to overlook flaws because they are invested in the franchise. They are literally the target audience. If anyone should have been the easiest person to satisfy, it should have been them. Yet even they are saying, "Yeah, the criticism is valid." That is the part that stands out. A lot of the time when Sword Art Online gets criticized, fans immediately jump to the defense and act like the only people who dislike it are outsiders who never understood the series. But here you have an actual fan admitting that the movie has major weaknesses while still enjoying it. And honestly, this might be the most accurate description of Sword Art Online as a whole. The biggest defense this comment gives is basically, "I know it's bad, but it's my kind of bad." And that is completely fair. People are allowed to enjoy things that are flawed. Plenty of franchises survive because fans are attached to them even when they recognize the problems. But it also proves the point of the criticism. If even fans are admitting the characters are annoying, the writing has issues, and the criticisms are valid, then the argument that critics are simply haters who don't understand Sword Art Online falls apart. Sometimes, the fans themselves are the ones making the strongest case against the franchise. The difference is that some fans can admit when something is flawed and still enjoy it. Others will spend years trying to convince everyone that those flaws do not exist. It's actually refreshing to see that some Sword Art Online fans still have standards and are capable of being honest about the things they enjoy. This comment is a good example of someone who can admit that they had fun watching the movie while also acknowledging that the criticism is completely valid. And honestly, that says a lot about how flawed this movie is. This person is not coming from a place of hatred. They are not someone who already disliked Sword Art Online and wanted another excuse to criticize it. They are a fan who actively supported the franchise, paid money to watch the movie, and when in wanting to enjoy it. If anyone was going to give this movie the benefit of the doubt, it should have been them. Yet even after enjoying it, they can still recognize the problems. That is the difference between being a fan and being blindly loyal. A real fan should be able to look at something they love and admit when it has weaknesses. Enjoying something does not magically erase bad writing, annoying characters, or poor storytelling choices. In fact, this kind of reaction is much more reasonable than the usual defenses where any criticism is immediately dismissed as hate or blamed on someone not understanding the series. This comment basically proves that you do not have to hate Sword Art Online to admit when Sword Art Online has problems. The fact that someone can say, "I enjoyed this movie, but the criticisms are still accurate," shows that the issues are not just coming from outside critics. They are being noticed by people who are already invested in the franchise. And that is what makes this movie's reception so interesting. When even fans who enjoyed it are admitting that the flaws are obvious, it becomes much harder to argue that all criticism is just negativity from people who hate the series. Sometimes the criticism is simply correct. Sometimes a movie can still be entertaining while also being badly written. And in this case, even some Sword Art Online fans are willing to admit that. And those are just some of the comments I was able to find. There are probably a lot more reactions out there, but with over 3,000 comments to go through, it is impossible to read every single one. There is only so much time you can spend digging through a comment section. But even after looking through a small portion of them, the pattern is pretty clear. A lot of the discussion is not coming from people who hate Sword Art Online. A lot of it is coming from people who actually enjoy the franchise but feel disappointed by this specific release. And that is what makes the reaction so interesting. Usually, when a franchise gets criticized, the conversation is mostly divided between fans defending it and critics attacking it. But with this movie, there are fans who are joining the criticism themselves. People who normally defend Sword Art Online are admitting they were disappointed. People who still love the franchise are saying they cannot justify this release. People who wanted to enjoy it are explaining why it failed. Of course, not every single fan hates it. There will always be people who enjoy a movie that others dislike, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. But the amount of frustration coming from longtime fans is hard to ignore. The most important thing is that these are not just random comments from people who were never interested in Sword Art Online. These are people who already understand the appeal of the franchise and wanted this movie to succeed. They were the audience this was supposed to satisfy. And yet many of them are the ones saying it did not work. That tells you more than any outside criticism ever could. When the people who should be celebrating a new release are instead debating why it was disappointing, that is a serious warning sign. A franchise should make its fans excited. It should make them want to share their passion. It should give them something to be proud of. But when thousands of comments turn into discussions about disappointment, frustration, and criticism, you have to wonder what went wrong. Because the biggest problem is not that critics disliked the movie. The biggest problem is that many fans wanted to love it and still walked away unhappy. This movie is not just an embarrassment to the Sword Art Online franchise. It is also becoming an embarrassment for the community surrounding it. And that is a much bigger problem. A franchise can survive a bad release. Every series has weak movies, disappointing episodes, or projects that do not live up to expectations. But when a release causes the fanbase itself to turn against it, that creates a completely different situation. The people who should be celebrating this movie are the ones criticizing it. The people who should be defending it are the ones admitting it failed. The people who should be recommending it are the ones warning others not to waste their time and money. That is not the kind of reaction a franchise wants from its own community. For years, Sword Art Online fans have fought against the reputation that the series is poorly written or overrated. They have spent years defending the franchise, arguing with critics, and explaining why people should give SAO a chance. But now, some fans are not even fighting anymore. They are openly saying the movie disappointed them. They are pointing out the flaws. They are agreeing with criticisms that many of them would have pushed back against in the past. And that creates an awkward situation for the community because instead of bringing fans together, this movie has given them another reason to argue and criticize. A movie based around a beloved franchise should be something that fans can rally around. It should be a celebration of everything people enjoy about the series. Instead, it has become another example of why people criticize Sword Art Online in the first place. The most unfortunate part is that many fans genuinely want to love this franchise. They want new content to succeed. They want new stories that remind them why they became fans. But when the community spends more time defending why a release is not as bad as people say instead of celebrating what makes it great, that is a serious problem. A passionate fan base should not have to apologize for the thing they love. They should not have to explain away every flaw. They should not have to pretend something is good just because it has a familiar name attached to it. And that is what makes this movie such a failure. It did not just disappoint people who already disliked Sword Art Online. It disappointed some of the very fans who wanted to support it. When a franchise release becomes something that fans are embarrassed to defend, that says a lot. The biggest damage this movie did was not just to Sword Art Online's reputation. It damaged the excitement and pride of the community that supported it. At the end of the day, if something makes a fan like a franchise less, then it has failed. That should be the easiest standard to understand. The entire purpose of a new release is to strengthen people's connection to the series. It should remind fans why they fell in love with the franchise in the first place. It should make them more excited, more invested, and more proud to be part of the community. But when a new movie does the opposite, when it makes longtime fans lose enthusiasm, question the franchise, or even feel embarrassed to support it, then something clearly went wrong. And that is what makes this situation so damaging. These are not people who were looking for a reason to hate Sword Art Online. These are people who already liked it. They already had an emotional connection to the world, the characters, and the ideas behind the franchise. They wanted this movie to succeed. They wanted another great experience. They wanted something they could celebrate. Instead, some fans walked away feeling disappointed and frustrated. That is not a victory. A franchise should not rely on fans saying, "Well, it was not that bad." The goal should be making fans say, "This is why I love this series." When a release causes fans to become more negative towards something they previously enjoyed, it has failed at the most basic level. It does not matter how much nostalgia is attached to it. It does not matter how recognizable the characters are. It does not matter how loyal the fan base is. If the end result is that fans feel less excited about the franchise than they did before, then the product did the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. The harshest criticism is not when someone who never liked Sword Art Online says a movie is bad. The harshest criticism is when someone who loved Sword Art Online watches it and thinks, "This made me enjoy the franchise less." Because those are the people who were already willing to give it a chance. They were already on its side. They were already invested. So if even they walk away disappointed, that is not just another negative opinion. That is a sign that the franchise failed to take care of the people who supported it the most. A good release should create more fans. A great release should strengthen the existing fan base. But a bad release can do something much worse. It can make the people who were already fans start questioning why they loved it in the first place. This movie is so bad that it actually made some fans take off their rose-tinted glasses. And that might be the biggest criticism of all. For years, many Sword Art Online fans have been willing to overlook the franchise's problems because they are attached to what they love about it. They remember the excitement of Aincrad. They remember the characters, the music, the nostalgia, and the feeling they had when they first discovered the series. And because of that connection, they were willing to forgive a lot. Every franchise has flaws, but dedicated fans often find ways to look past them. They focus on the positives. They remember the moments that made them fans in the first place. But eventually, a release can come along that makes even the most loyal supporters stop and look at the franchise differently. And this movie seems to have been that moment for some people. Instead of walking away thinking about the things they loved, some fans walked away noticing all the problems they had previously ignored. The weak writing, the frustrating character decisions, the lack of meaningful development, the feeling that the movie was not respecting the audience that supported it. Sometimes all it takes is one bad release to make people reevaluate everything that came before. That does not mean fans suddenly hate the entire franchise. It means they are starting to view it more critically instead of automatically defending it. The nostalgia starts wearing off. The excuses start becoming harder to believe. The flaws that were always there become impossible to ignore. And that is what makes this movie's reaction so interesting. The harshest criticism is not coming from people who never cared about Sword Art Online. It is coming from people who cared enough to give it countless chances. They wanted to love this movie. They wanted another reason to celebrate the franchise. But instead, some fans are looking at it and realizing that their loyalty may have caused them to overlook more problems than they originally admitted. A great release makes fans appreciate a franchise even more. A bad release can make them question why they supported it in the first place. And when a movie is powerful enough to make longtime fans finally remove their rose-tinted glasses, that says a lot about how badly it failed to deliver. This movie did not just disappoint fans. It may have actually damaged the Sword Art Online brand itself. And that is the biggest problem with a release like this. A bad movie can be forgotten. A mediocre movie can come and go. But a movie that leaves fans feeling frustrated, embarrassed, and disappointed can actively hurt the reputation of the franchise. Because every new release is supposed to strengthen the brand. It is supposed to remind people why they became fans. It is supposed to bring excitement, attract new viewers, and give longtime supporters something to celebrate. Instead, this movie seems to have done the opposite. It gave critics more ammunition. It gave longtime fans more reasons to question the franchise. And it created a situation where some supporters are not proudly recommending it, but instead explaining why they cannot defend it. That is a terrible outcome for any franchise. The most loyal fans are supposed to be your biggest advertisement. They are the people who convince others to watch, buy, and get invested. But if those same fans are walking away saying, "This was disappointing," "This was not worth it," or "I cannot defend this," then the damage goes beyond just one movie. It affects people's perception of Sword Art Online as a whole. Someone who was curious about getting into the franchise might see this reaction and think twice. Someone who already had doubts might see this as confirmation. And longtime fans might start looking back at the series differently. That is the risk of releasing something that fails this badly. Sometimes doing nothing is better than releasing something that lowers people's opinion of the brand. Because at least if the movie never existed, fans could continue imagining what it could have been. They could keep hoping for a great Sword Art Online project. They could keep being excited for the future. But now, instead of adding to the legacy of the franchise, this movie becomes another example people point to when criticizing it. A new release should make people more interested in a franchise. It should make fans want to talk about it. It should create excitement. But when a project makes fans less enthusiastic, less proud, and less willing to defend the series, then it has failed at the most important job of all. At this point, you have to wonder if releasing this movie actually helped Sword Art Online, or if the franchise would have been better off without it. The biggest problem with this movie is that it did not just disappoint fans. It gave Sword Art Online's critics even more ammunition. For years, people who criticize Sword Art Online have pointed to the same issues. Weak writing, questionable character decisions, unrealistic game mechanics, and a story that often prioritizes hype over substance. And instead of proving those critics wrong, this movie gave them even more examples to use. Every flaw that critics have talked about for years feels amplified. The frustrating character writing, the lack of meaningful development, the feeling that the story expects fans to accept things instead of actually earning them. These are exactly the kinds of problems that critics have been calling out, and now this movie gives them another reason to bring those arguments back up. That is the worst possible outcome for a franchise release. A good movie can change people's minds, can make skeptics reconsider their opinions. It can show people who wrote off a franchise that maybe there is more value there than they expected. But a bad movie does the opposite. It confirms everything the critics already believed. Instead of creating new fans or improving the reputation of Sword Art Online, this movie became another example people can point to and say, "This is exactly what we were talking about." And what makes it worse is that this is not coming from people who were always against the franchise. Even some fans are making similar criticisms. That makes it much harder for defenders to dismiss. You cannot simply say, the haters do not understand Sword Art Online, when longtime fans are admitting that the same problems exist. The movie was supposed to be something that celebrated the franchise. It was supposed to show people why Sword Art Online still had value. Instead, it gave critics more evidence for their arguments and gave fans another reason to be disappointed. A franchise cannot keep relying on nostalgia and the loyalty of its fanbase forever. Eventually, it has to deliver something that reminds people why it deserves support. But when a new release only strengthens the arguments of the people who already disliked it, that is a massive failure. The movie did not silence the critics. It handed them a bigger microphone. And now I have to wonder what the next excuse is going to be from the Sword Art Online fans who still want to defend this movie. Because when even some of the biggest supporters are admitting that it failed, what argument is left? Are they going to say the fans who disliked it were not hardcore enough? Are they going to say the people who criticized it were never true fans? Because that is usually where the conversation goes whenever a beloved franchise receives negative feedback. Instead of addressing the actual problems, the response becomes about questioning the loyalty of the people who complained. But that argument becomes much harder to make here. The people criticizing this movie are not random outsiders. They are fans. They are people who know the franchise. They are people who understand the characters, the world, and what Sword Art Online is supposed to be. Some of them have defended the series for years. Some of them have supported multiple releases. Some of them actively wanted this movie to be good. So if those people are disappointed, it cannot simply be dismissed as they do not understand SAO. They understand it enough to know when something is not working. And that is the uncomfortable part. For years, critics of Sword Art Online have been told that they are missing the point, that they do not appreciate the series, or that they are judging it unfairly. But now some of the same criticisms are coming from within the fanbase itself. The people who are supposed to be defending the franchise are pointing out the flaws. The people who are supposed to be celebrating the movie are questioning it. The people who are supposed to be the easiest audience to satisfy are saying they were disappointed. So the question becomes, if these fans are not real enough to count, then who actually does? How much support does someone have to show before their criticism is considered valid? Do they have to like every single release? Do they have to defend every creative decision? Do they have to ignore every flaw just because they love the franchise? That is not being a fan. That is just refusing to admit when something does not work. A true fan can love a franchise and still criticize it. In fact, those are often the fans who care the most because they want the series to improve. The biggest problem for Sword Art Online defenders is that this time, the criticism is not coming from people who hate the franchise. It is coming from people who wanted to love it. And no amount of excuses can change that. At this point, you could honestly make the argument that you could get an AI to write a better Sword Art Online movie than this. And the crazy part is that I am not just saying that as a joke. I would actually know because I have used AI to help write multiple stories myself. I have experimented with creating characters, building worlds, developing conflicts, and coming up with entire story concepts. And even with basic prompts, AI can create stories with more interesting ideas, stronger character motivations, and more logical progression than what we got here. That is what makes this movie so frustrating. The problem is not that it needed to reinvent Sword Art Online. Nobody was expecting a masterpiece that completely changed the franchise forever. Fans simply wanted a story that understood what made the series appealing. They wanted interesting characters. They wanted meaningful conflicts. They wanted a world that felt exciting. They wanted something that respected the audience's investment. Instead, the movie feels like it is going through the motions. And that is where the AI comparison comes from. The issue is not that AI is some magical replacement for writers. A good story still requires human creativity, editing, and direction. But AI can at least generate ideas. It can at least explore different possibilities. It can at least create scenarios where characters learn from their mistakes and where conflicts actually have consequences. When a professionally produced movie starts feeling less thoughtful than something generated from a simple prompt, that is a serious problem. Especially for a franchise like Sword Art Online, which has such an interesting foundation. You have a massive virtual reality death game. You have a world where players are trapped and forced to survive. You have endless possibilities for character drama, strategy, exploration, and psychological tension. The premise is already there. The franchise does not need a complicated formula. It just needs someone to actually take advantage of the ideas. And yet somehow, fans are walking away feeling like the movie did less with its potential than a random AI-generated story prompt could. That is not a compliment to AI. That is an indictment of the writing. When fans start saying, "I could have gotten a better story from an AI," that shows how low their expectations have fallen. Because the biggest disappointment is not that this movie was bad. It is that Sword Art Online has a concept that should make great stories almost impossible to fail with. And somehow it still managed to waste it. For example, here is a story called Mercy of Artemis. This is a story I created using AI, and it is inspired by Greek mythology, taking place in ancient Greece. The idea behind it is simple. Take the world, mythology, and themes that already exist and build an original story around them. Ancient Greece is filled with incredible possibilities. You have powerful gods, legendary heroes, dangerous monsters, political conflicts, and characters forced to make impossible choices. A story like this has a strong foundation because it understands the importance of its setting. Greek mythology is not interesting just because of the gods and monsters. It is interesting because of the conflicts behind them. The gods are flawed. Heroes are not always noble. Every victory comes with a cost. That gives characters something meaningful to struggle with. And that is what makes a story engaging. You do not just need flashy battles or familiar names. You need characters with motivations, consequences, and a reason for the audience to care about what happens next. That is the kind of thing that makes mythology so timeless. Thousands of years later, people are still telling these stories because the themes still work. And when I compare something like Mercy of Artemis to a movie like Sword Art Online, Unanswered Butterfly, the frustrating part is that Sword Art Online already has an incredible foundation too. It has a trapped virtual reality world. It has life or death stakes. It has a massive unexplored game world. It has endless opportunities for adventure and character development. The ingredients are already there. The problem is execution. A great concept can still fail if the writing does not take advantage of it. Meanwhile, even a simple mythology-inspired story can become interesting when the world, characters, and conflicts are treated seriously. That is why it is so disappointing when a franchise like Sword Art Online wastes its own potential. The series has a premise that should be almost impossible to mess up. It has the perfect setup for an unforgettable story. But instead of exploring the possibilities, it often feels like the franchise relies on nostalgia, familiar characters, and the audience's existing attachment. And that is where the comparison becomes frustrating. If a story generated from a basic idea and a mythology-inspired concept can create stronger conflicts, more interesting characters, and a more engaging world, then a professionally produced franchise with years of history should be able to do even better. Sword Art Online does not have a lack of potential. It has a problem with using the potential it already has. Actaeon, a skilled hunter, makes one fatal mistake. He accidentally stumbles upon Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, bathing. Expecting death, he's instead given a chance to earn his life back. Hunt down 10 deadly beasts, each more fearsome than the last. Fail and his life is forfeit. As Actaeon faces the brutal challenges ahead, Artemis watches from afar, torn between justice and mercy. In a world where the gods rarely forgive, Actaeon's survival depends on more than just skill. It's a test of courage, honor, and fate itself. Chapter 1. A Hunter's Folly. The first rays of dawn spilled softly over the rugged slopes of Mount Cithaeron. The summer air carried the sharp scent of pine and wild earth. Among whispering trees and tangled undergrowth, a figure moved with the sure grace of a born predator. Actaeon, grandson of Apollo and apprentice to the legendary centaur Chiron, was no ordinary hunter. Muscular and lean, his body was honed by years of relentless training. His name was spoken with awe among the hunters of Greece. Ahead, his pack of hounds bounded eagerly, noses to the ground and tails high with excitement. Actaeon followed silently, every muscle coiled and eyes sharp, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The thrill of the hunt pulsed through his veins, a fire that grew with each step. In the wild heart of Cithaeron, he was at home. The cool morning air filled his lungs as he moved, senses alert to every sound and scent. He hunted not for money or food, those were concerns for lesser men. Today, he hunted for the challenge itself, the test that sharpened his skill and spirit. The forest was his proving ground, the chase his ritual. In these quiet moments, with only nature's breath and his pounding heart around him, Actaeon felt truly alive. Actaeon's sharp ears caught a faint sound, a soft, irregular splashing coming from deeper in the woods. He froze, muscles tensing as he lifted a hand to still his hounds. "Stay," he whispered. The dogs obediently crouched, their eyes fixed on him. Silently, Actaeon slipped through the trees, moving toward the sound. The splash came again, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading in water. His breath slowed, every sense alert to what lay ahead. Pushing aside a curtain of leaves, he caught sight of a small clearing in the distance. Further ahead, nestled among sunlit rocks, lay a clear spring, its surface glimmering faintly under the morning light. And in the water a woman bathed. Her pale skin shimmered softly in the morning light, flawless and smooth like fine marble. Golden hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the sunlight with every gentle movement. She moved with effortless grace, completely unaware of the hunter's watchful eyes. Beside the spring, folded carefully on a flat stone, lay a pile of clothes, soft white fabric embroidered with delicate golden trim. The garments gleamed faintly in the early sun, hinting at the woman's divine elegance. The simple beauty of the robes contrasted with the wildness of the forest, marking her as something extraordinary, untouched by mortal concerns. Actaeon slipped quietly behind a cluster of thick bushes, his breath steady as he settled into the shadows. His sharp eyes never left the woman in the spring, taking in every detail without a sound. The woman before him was unlike anyone Actaeon had ever seen. Her movements flowed with a quiet grace, as if the forest itself breathed through her. Her eyes were sharp and clear, holding a calm intensity that felt both ancient and alive, like the silent watch of the wild woods. Every motion was fluid and effortless, a perfect balance of strength and elegance that stirred something deep within him. Around her, the air seemed to hum with an unseen power, as if the forest itself acknowledged her presence. She was beauty and force wrapped in one, distant yet impossible to look away from. Actaeon had been with many beautiful women before. As a skilled hunter and grandson of Apollo, he was well known and desired by many, yet none had ever held his gaze like this. There was something different about her, something almost otherworldly. Her beauty was not only in her flawless skin or golden hair, but in the calm power that radiated from her as she bathed. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes widened, locked helplessly on the vision before him. His breath caught, and his mouth hung slightly open, stunned by a beauty that defied anything he had ever known. Though his mind screamed for him to turn away, his body refused to obey. Something fierce bloomed inside him, an infatuation so sudden and overwhelming it left him rooted in place. It was not like the fleeting passions he had known before. This was deeper, sharper, as if the very sight of her had pierced through every layer of pride and reason. For the first time in his life, Actaeon felt truly powerless, swept up in a feeling he could neither name nor fight. A strange warmth stirred deep within Actaeon's chest, unlike anything he had ever known. It was more than simple admiration or desire. It was all mixed with something fragile and new. He felt drawn to her, as if some invisible thread tied his fate to hers in that quiet forest clearing. This was a yearning that went beyond the physical. This woman, so calm and so powerful, awakened a part of him that longed not just for conquest, but for connection. His mind raced, torn between caution and curiosity, between respect and an overwhelming urge to be near her. Every glance stole his breath away. He was captivated not only by her beauty, but by the mystery she carried, like a secret written in the wind. In her presence, the world felt larger and more alive. Actaeon remained still, eyes fixed on the woman, but curiosity pulled at him. He carefully shifted his weight to get a better view, trying not to disturb a single leaf or twig. But as he moved, his foot caught on a dry twig, snapping it sharply in the stillness of the clearing. The woman's head snapped up, her gaze immediately locking onto the source of the noise. Their eyes met. Actaeon's heart skipped a beat as he stared into eyes fierce and ancient, silver-gray like storm clouds, filled with a power that chilled him to the core. In that moment, the truth crashed over him like a wave. This was no ordinary woman. This was Artemis, his great aunt, the goddess of the hunt. Artemis's eyes glinted sharply, a fierce blend of anger and shock hardening her features. She moved instinctively, raising her arms to shield her body, guarding the sacred privacy no man had ever breached before, and she was determined it would remain that way. Her voice, sharp and cold as mountain air, broke the silence. "How dare you spy upon me, mortal?" The thought that any man had witnessed her in such a vulnerable moment was something she could neither forgive nor forget. To be seen like this was to have a part of her power and mystery stripped away, exposed to a world that was not meant to behold it. Actaeon's breath hitched as he realized the gravity of what had happened. His voice was low and urgent as he began to speak, stumbling over his words in a rush to apologize. "I meant no disrespect. I did not seek to spy or intrude." Closing his eyes, he bowed his head deeply, lowering himself toward the earth in a gesture of sincere remorse. His heart pounded with fear and regret. Artemis, still draped in the water's shimmering droplets, moved swiftly to gather her garments. She began getting dressed with graceful precision, the tension in her expression softening ever so slightly. Once clothed, Artemis stepped forward through the quiet forest clearing, her gaze fixed steadily on Actaeon as she approached. Actaeon slowly opened his eyes and lifted his gaze toward Artemis. The soft light of the morning caught her features, revealing a face both striking and serene. Her high cheekbones were sculpted like marble, flawless and smooth. Her silver-gray eyes held a fierce intelligence and a quiet depth that seemed to see far beyond the world around them. Her golden hair framed her face like a halo of sunlight, cascading in gentle waves over her shoulders. Dressed in flowing white robes edged with delicate gold trim, she carried the undeniable presence of someone both powerful and untouchable, a goddess walking among mortals. Artemis's voice rang out sharp and cold, cutting through the morning air. "You have seen what no mortal man was ever meant to see. Such disrespect cannot go unpunished. Perhaps I should transform you into a stag, doomed to wander the forests forever, never again to walk among men." Actaeon's voice trembled as he hurried to speak, desperation clear in every word. "Please, I swear it was an accident. I never meant to disrespect you. I stumbled upon you by chance. I was not seeking you out." He lowered his gaze, shame flooding his face. "I accept whatever fate you decide for me, but I beg you for a chance to make amends, to prove that I am worthy of your mercy." His hands clenched at his sides, panic and sorrow twisting together in his chest. "Please, do not condemn me without hearing me. I only ask for one chance." Artemis's sharp gaze faltered for a moment as recognition dawned in her eyes. "You?" she murmured, her voice losing some of its edge. "You are the grandson of my brother, Apollo." A flicker of softness touched her expression, the fury cooling just enough to reveal a trace of concern. She had heard whispers of him before, how skilled and brave he was, a hunter of rare talent. "For that reason alone I will grant you a chance," she said, her voice steadier now. "You will have the opportunity to redeem yourself and prove your worth." Actaeon's chest loosened as relief washed over him. A grateful breath escaped his lips and he nodded eagerly. "Thank you. I will accept whatever you ask of me," he said with conviction. His voice steady despite the lingering fear. Artemis fixed him with a firm gaze. There are 10 dangerous beasts roaming. The lands, creatures that bring havoc and despair wherever they go. Each one is more fearsome than the last. You will hunt them all, she declared. Only when you have succeeded will you be redeemed in my eyes. Actaeon absorbed her words, the weight of the challenge settling heavily on his shoulders. 10 beasts, each more dangerous than the last. The very thought sent a thrill mixed with dread coursing through him. This was no ordinary hunt. It was a trial that could cost him everything. He straightened, determination hardening his gaze. Tell me where to begin, he said, voice firm despite the storm raging inside. Actaeon absorbed her words, the weight of the challenge settling heavily on his shoulders. 10 beasts, each more dangerous than the last. The very thought sent a thrill mixed with dread coursing through him. This was no ordinary hunt. It was a trial that could cost him everything. He straightened, determination hardening his gaze. Tell me where to begin, he said, voice firm despite the storm raging inside. Artemis regarded him for a long moment, then gestured toward the dense forest beyond the clearing. The first beast dwells in the shadowed valleys near Mount Helicon. It is a monstrous boar, its tusks like spears and its fury unmatched. Many hunters have tried to bring it down, but none have returned. Actaeon nodded, already feeling the familiar pull of the hunt stir within him. A surge of determination quickened his pulse, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the clearing. Go now, Artemis commanded, her voice carrying both authority and solemnity. Face this first trial and prove your courage, your skill, and your honor. Only after you have defeated this beast will I reveal the next challenge. Step by step, your path to redemption will be shown. After casting one final glance at the goddess, Actaeon turned and left the clearing, stepping toward the looming forest as the morning light stretched long shadows across the earth. He brought 2 fingers to his lips and gave a sharp whistle. Moments later, his hounds came bounding through the trees, eager and alert, falling into step beside him. The path before him was perilous, but something inside him had changed. This was no longer just a hunt. It was a calling, a chance to rise above the mistakes of a moment and carve his name into something greater than memory. A legend. Chapter 2. The First Trial. The sun rose steadily overhead as Actaeon traveled toward the shadowed valleys near Mount Helicon, the forest thick around him and alive with distant sounds. His footsteps were sure, but his mind was restless, turning over the same question again and again. How was he going to defeat the beast that waited for him? Somewhere ahead, hidden deep within the wild terrain, the monstrous boar Artemis had warned him about was said to roam. Though Actaeon had never seen it with his own eyes, stories told of a beast larger, swifter, and more savage than any he had ever faced. He had hunted many fierce creatures before, but none like this. This was no ordinary prey. Actaeon had spent his life hunting boars, fierce, untamed beasts with razor-sharp tusks and hides thick as armor. Knowing this would be different, Actaeon understood the beast carried a presence marked by the gods themselves, charged with a dangerous power that set it apart from all others. His mind drifted to the old stories of Heracles, the mighty demigod son of Zeus, who had once captured the great Erymanthian boar by driving it into deep snow where its strength meant little. It was a clever tactic, brutal but effective. But this was no winter hunt. Summer had scorched the land dry, and there would be no snow to slow the beast. Actaeon clenched his jaw. He could not rely on brute force alone, and tricks that had worked for others would not serve him now. He needed a plan, and quickly. Actaeon knelt on the soft earth, bowing his head as the quiet of the forest settled around him. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy. In this moment of uncertainty, he hoped her guidance would light his path. If anyone could help him outwit a beast marked by the gods, it was her. A soft rustle caught Actaeon's attention. He opened his eyes slowly and saw Athena standing before him, her dark brown hair cascading in waves beneath the shining crest of her helmet and the gleam of her polished armor. Her presence was calm yet commanding, as if the very air shifted around her. I have watched from Mount Olympus, she said with a slight smile, and I saw what happened between you and Artemis. It was amusing, to say the least. Actaeon blinked in surprise, unsure whether to be honored or embarrassed. Athena's eyes softened. I know what you face, and I know what you must do. Since I am a close friend of Artemis, I will help you with this first trial. You will need all the help you can get if you are to succeed. Actaeon felt a wave of relief wash over him. To receive help from Athena herself, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, was a blessing beyond measure. He straightened, his eyes filled with renewed hope and determination. Athena's eyes gleamed with sharp intelligence as she spoke. You cannot rely on brute strength to defeat this beast. The boar is massive, its power overwhelming, but its speed and endurance are limited. Your only chance is to become its bait. Actaeon's breath caught as she continued. You must lure it into the open, keep it chasing you relentlessly across the rugged terrain. Use every twist and turn, every hill and hollow to wear it down. The boar will grow tired, heavy with its own strength, until it stumbles, exhausted and vulnerable. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried both warning and encouragement. This will be a deadly dance, one that will test your stamina and wit to their limits. But if you can outlast it, if you can survive the chase, the beast will be yours to claim. Actaeon swallowed hard, his mind racing. He was used to being the hunter, the one who stalked and struck with precision and power. To become the bait, to lure the beast and run for his life. This was something entirely new, something that unsettled him deep down. He had always relied on his skill, his strength, and his sharp instincts to conquer any challenge. Now, the thought of playing prey, of drawing the boar's wrath while keeping just out of reach, filled him with uncertainty. The stakes were higher than ever, and every step could be his last. Yet beneath that doubt, a flicker of resolve began to burn. He knew this was the only path forward. Athena raises her arm, and with a flash of divine light the Aegis shield appears beside Actaeon. Its surface gleams with a fierce, rippling pattern like storm clouds, and at its center the face of a Gorgon is carved in exquisite detail, both terrifying and mesmerizing. This shield is your defense, Athena says firmly. If the boar closes in, it can withstand the might of its charge and protect you from harm. Use it to block and parry, to hold your ground when the chase brings the beast too near. With this shield you gain more than protection. You gain a symbol of divine power and the strength to face what lies ahead.